Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Horn blasts shattered the stillness of dawn, awakening Jon with a sharp jolt. In the bed next to him, Arya was curled up tight and stirring slowly. Loath as he was to wake her, he had no choice, as the horns were soon joined by several voices raised in alarm. Outside, the storm had died, and he could hear the gates creaking on rusty hinges and the stuttering clatter of the portcullis being raised. In the room next door, muffled thumps informed him the commotion had also disturbed his father. Jon was relieved. If there was trouble below, Rhaegar would be needed. He rose from the bed he shared with Arya, nudging her gently enough to awaken her without causing panic. She stirred again, eyelids fluttering just as another blast of the horns below startled her into full consciousness. "What's happening?" she asked, looking all about her. "I don't know," he answered, pulling on his breeches and boots. "Wait here, take cover in the garderobe beyond until I know it's safe." She pulled a face, already reaching for needle. "I'm coming with you, stupid." Although he knew it was pointless, he tried to reason with her anyway. "Arya, if there's trouble, that thing won't help you. Now take cover, please." "This thing has saved my life more times than you know," she argued. "I'm coming with you." She was already pulling on the clothes she had brought from Westeros, dragging them out of a rough-spun sack she carried all her worldly possessions in. There was no use in arguing further. Not now she had that stubborn look about her. One thing that had not changed since their childhood at Winterfell. Besides, there was no more time as a sharp knocking came at the door. Jon quickly fixed his sword belt in place as he hurried to answer the call. On the other side of the door, he found an old serving lady wrapped in layers of shawls and her gathered under a tatty old net, clearly just roused from her own bed. She bore a single candle, wax dripping down its sides. "My lord says you're to come now," they're gathered in the yard. "Is it an attack?" he asked, brusquely. She had no answer. "I know not, my lord." She was obviously busy, so Jon let her go on her way. In the room behind him, Arya was dressed already in breeches, and a tunic too big for her. Needle was sheathed at her hip, looking woefully insubstantial for any protracted fighting that may lay ahead. Meanwhile, the old serving woman was now hammering at Rhaegar's door. Farther down the corridor, the sound of running feet echoed down the turnpike stairs. Grabbing Arya's hand, Jon led her out into the fray, with Rhaegar soon falling into step behind them. He hadn't even properly met Arya yet, and was still under the impression that he'd gotten a young girl, a new job within the household. However, now wasn't the time to explain. The three of them emerged into the common, where Lord Jason Mallister and his son were speaking with a man he dimly recognized as Wyman Manderly's master-at-arms. Relief swept over Jon, bringing a rare smile to his face. "They're ours," Arya said, almost laughing. "Sansa has called her banners for us." Amidst the tumult of Arya's arrival, Jon had almost forgotten the reinforcements Sansa had sent. Turning from the common hall, he hastened toward the exit, where the foot soldiers and cavalrymen were still pouring through the gates. Many were mounted and armored, but the vast majority were simple foot soldiers. Manderlys, Glovers, Serwins, even a couple of Mormonts. They weren't thousands strong yet, but they were inching ever closer to it. "She hasn't called the banners, my lord, but she's come through with those reinforcements she promised." Jon turned around to find Brynden Tully at his shoulder. He beheld the scene before him with a small smile, something akin to hope. After a moment, he noticed Arya. "Oh ho!" he exclaimed. "I believe it is my niece." Rhaegar smiled, the smile of a girl who'd forgotten she even had a real family, and found herself meeting relatives she never knew she had. It heartened Jon to see her happy so soon, after yet another scare. She bounced up, extending a hand to her great-uncle. "My mother told me all about you," she greeted him. "I'm Arya, of House Stark." "How do you do?" "All the better for meeting you at last, Arya of House Stark." Brynden mussed up her hair, playfully pulling her into headlock as he moved closer to Jon. "Many of that lot are Bolton's old men looking for a way back to good grace. They're fighting under your cousin's banners now." Initially, Jon bridled, but he gave it a second thought, considering it evenly. They were not actual Boltons, just regular soldiers who had the misfortune to be born on Bolton lands. They never had the luxury of actually picking a side or a lord to serve, unless they were sellswords, and whoever of those the Boltons had would be long gone by now. Well then, I have a duty to show them the way back to good grace, he replied, at length. And it stars at dawn on the morrow, my lord. For then we march on Riverrun. Brendan met his gaze, a look of understanding passing between them. Arya, still in the playful headlock, managed to wriggle free as her great-uncle fell still. Then it will be done, he agreed. Jon already felt they'd waited too long at Seagard, while the rest of the Riverlands had laid to waste. But now it was done, and it felt like progress. The Godswood of Winterfell was a dark and primal place. 3 acres of ash, oak and pine, sentinels, while at its core the huge white heart tree held dominion among their ancient gods. Some of the trees were as old as the realm itself, watered by the cold and stagnant pool, its surface made black and glacial in the weak light that made it through the canopy of trees overhead. It was there that Sansa brought the vial of shade of the evening. If the ironwood trees whose leaves made the potion were connected to the weirwoods, it felt like the right place to be. She held the small vial in the palm of her hand, its liquid made inky black by the poor light. Gathering her courage, she dug her nails into the waxy seal and popped the stopper out. It landed at her feet, lost among the undergrowth that sprouted at the base of the heart tree. Marwyn said she had to take it all, so she wet her lips and pinched her nose with her free hand to stop herself from smelling the rancid meat and sour milk smell it gave off. Although she blocked the smell, there was little she could do about the taste, and the taste was every bit as bad as the smell. It was all she could do to gulp it down and keep it down. Her stomach churned, her mouth watered as if she was about to vomit. But just as she thought she would retch it all back up again, the sourness dissipated and gave way to a smooth sweetness she had not experienced since the weirwood paste Bran had given her. It felt warm, like she had been wrapped in a soft woolen blanket, and she eased her back against the trunk of the tree and waited. Little happened at first. She seemed to keep waiting while the woods grew darker and darker. The light seemed to turn a deep blue, causing her to grow anxious. Merwin had said nothing about the world turning blue. Then his anxiety was increased as somewhere a baby cried. It was distant at first, but growing louder, closer. Craster serves crueler gods than you and I, boy. It was a man's voice that spoke, but she couldn't see him. But his words were clear over the wailing baby, mildly panicking. Sansa stood up quickly, looking for the source of the noise. She stumbled to the edge of the pool, where she saw the images playing across the surface of the water. A baby in swaddling, snow blowing in its face, falling silent as the ice monster touched its face, turning its eyes a burning blue. She gasped, trying to recoil, but the scene changed and held her fast in place. The ice baby was replaced by another baby, held in the arms of a terrified girl. Sansa didn't know her, but she was traveling with a brother of the Night's Watch. It wasn't Jon, but a large, fat, young man with ice forming in his beard and an obsidian dagger clutched in his hands. A chorus of disembodied voices seemed to echo in her head, "The baby, the baby." All the while, Sansa watched the baby in the girl's arms, the connection completely lost on her. Sansa closed her eyes, trying to erase the images she saw, but the visions continued as she stumbled deeper into the Godswood. When she opened them again, she found herself face to face with a huge black dragon, who quickly took wing and soared into the air. She turned a corner to where Jon was standing at the prow of a ship, looking the Night's King dead in the eye, an army of corpses coming back to life. She tried to scream, but the sound was lost, drowned out by Cersei's anguished cries. Joffrey lay in her arms, purple-cheeked and bloody-nosed, eyes bulging blindly from his face. "Seize him!" she cried to no one in particular. "Seize him!" Tyrion froze, the incriminating goblet falling from his hands and hitting the floor with a dull clunk. Jaime moved in the background, armored all in gold. Even though he had not been at Joffrey's wedding, he moved around Tyrion and Cersei like a golden ghost. "Valonqar," a voice in her head said. Both Tyrion and Jaime looked up as if the voice had spoken to them. Sansa whipped around, finding herself back in the Godswood. A small, squat woman with warts and large yellow eyes looked back at her from the undergrowth. She reminded Sansa of some sort of frog. "Will I be queen, though?" a small girl's voice asked. The warty old woman replied, "Aye, queen, you shall be until there comes another younger and more beautiful to cast you down and take all you hold dear." The old woman looked directly at Sansa, making her blood run cold. Was the prophecy directed at her, or the unseen girl, even as she tried to fix the old woman in her line of sight. The crone changed and morphed before her very eyes. She stretched and grew taller. Her hair turned to a lustrous auburn, and Sansa realized she was looking at herself, standing between two furious men, holding them apart. Her tearful pleas fell on deaf ears. Jon shrugged her off first, suddenly circling his father like a caged lion. All three of them were standing in a room made of sandstone, bathed in warm sunlight, but that was where the cheeriness ended. Jon was in a towering rage, scowling, and veins swelling in his temple, as he berated his father. "This realm once bled for your selfish desires, so you will do this thing and call it your penance." "You're punishing me for something I had no control over," Roko retorted, wide-eyed and imploring. "You know not what you ask of me, and I beg of you, anything but this." Sansa had seen enough. Turning her back on the fight, she aimed for the light ahead that she assumed was the pool before the heart tree. She emerged there breathless and dazed from all she had seen. But it wasn't over yet. Forcing herself to relax, she took hold of the heart tree's roots and closed her eyes, letting the visions come splitting through her head. A huge black dragon flying over the city, a silver-haired girl raining fire over the undead. She saw Jon in the prow of the boat again, eye to eye with the Night's King. The baby was back, wailing into the breast of his terrified mother. Joffrey choked his final breaths. Ramsay leered at her, with his pack dogs growling ominously in the darkness. He burst into flames. As Sonar swooped down from the skies, the flames kept burning, filling the air with thick and choking smoke. Summer Hall blackened and charred. People fled in terror, and Queen Rhaella's scream pierced the night. Blood magic merged with fire magic. Tragedy and chaos ensued. The smoke cleared, revealing Jon naked and covered in soot. Nursing an infant dragon, she turned from the desolation of Summer Hall, looking north to where the others gathered, starting their southward journey. The baby, the voices reminded her. The baby. It left her exhausted. Once it was over, she managed to make it back to the castle unaided, where she had barely the strength left to recount all she had seen to Marwyn and the Brotherhood. After that, she climbed the stairs to her chambers and fell onto the bed, sinking straight into a deep sleep. Even then, her mind wouldn't switch off. She dreamed of spring. Snows melted and butterflies folded their wings of blue and red, shedding dull gray cocoons. She was sitting on a blanket spread in a field with Robb, Arya, Bran, Rickon, and Jon. Her father let her have a cup of wine, only the one to herald the coming of summer. She awoke to more good news imparted by the maester loitering in her doorway. "Word from Seagard, my lady," he said. "Your reinforcements arrived safely, and your cousin marches on Riverrun. Furthermore, your sister has been found safe and well. She will be home soon." Sansa sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, allowing a touch of elation into her heart. If this wasn't real, just the after effects of that blue poison, she would burn the House of the Undying all over again. True to his word. Jon led from the front with Rhaegar on one side and Arya on the other. Behind them, Sir Brynden Tully, Sir Davos Seaworth, and Lord Jason Mallister rode close by, mounted on destriers and ready for war. Behind them came the troops, Mallister's men, Sansa's reinforcements. The remnants of House Tully and even a few of the other lords had come out to support them. Every time they passed through a river, lords' lands, their army got bigger, growing fat on the promise of revenge. Soon, Jon knew, it would be time to deliver. Once again reminded of how vast Westeros was, it took them over 2 weeks to travel from Seagard to Riverrun, and to his dismay, it was more of the same. Land laid waste, crops burned, and villages destroyed. Women had been mass raped, small folk put to the sword, and those who remained continued to live in fear of their lives. Worse, what the Lannisters had begun would soon be finished off by the unforgiving winter heading their way. There was no telling how long it would last, and there wasn't so much a grain of wheat to be had by way of food. With no grain to feed the livestock, the pigs and cows that survived the sacking and looting looked scrawny and sorry. Jon feared the oncoming winter in more ways than one. If the war in the north was to be won, he needed men to fight. If men were to fight, they needed food to live. All he saw was desolation and a greater desolation to come. "My lord," he said, turning to Brynden, "now that the Tyrells have abandoned the Lannisters, is it worth sending emissaries to them to seek an alliance?" What would they get in return? Brendan asked. You can see we have nothing to give. Chances are even my nephew will not be spared once the Lannisters hear of what we've done. Otherwise I'd annul that marriage to Rosen Frey and promise his hand to old Olenna and make him bloody happy about it. He has a son, doesn't he? Jon asked. He was a babe in arms, but he wouldn't stay that way forever. Surely there's a Tyrell cousin he can be promised to. We can send him to foster at Highgarden until such time is right. If there's a male cousin, then there's always Arya, he thought. He kept the thought to himself, seeing as she'd probably shove Needle up where the sun doesn't shine at the mere mention of her marriage. But times were desperate, and he needed all the leverage he could get. Meanwhile, Brendan shrugged. It's a definite possibility, my lord. A mischievous smile spread across his face as he added, Besides, I'd have thought the Lady Olenna was more to your own liking, my lord. Brendan almost choked, flushing red in the face. He was famed for having alienated his own brother by utterly refusing to marry anyone, no matter what the benefits. What Jon knew of Lady Olenna came from Sansa, the infamous Queen of Thorns and the famous Blackfish. It sounded like a marriage made in heaven to him. They reached the Red Fork, finding the river cutting them off from Riverrun, but the castle was tantalizingly close. Jon could see it clearly, barely a few miles over the water and downland. Rhaegar dismounted his destrayer and called down the dragon. In a flash of silver blue and a burst of flame, he appeared and beat up a storm with the force of his wings. Jon was used to it by now, but some of the men behind him ducked for cover and the horses reared, skittish against the sudden commotion. The dragon landed with a crash and Jon swore he felt the earth move. Rhaegar, meanwhile, approached the beast and soothed him quietly. Speaking in High Valyrian, however, Jon couldn't make out a word of it. While all that was happening, he turned his attention to Riverrun, where the people were now fleeing within the castle walls. He noted the Lannister lions hanging on banners suspended from the curtain walls. There were a few twin towers of House Frey, but it soon became clear to him who was really in charge of Riverrun. Father, Jon called to Rhaegar, fly him over there. Let them know we're on our way. I think they've got the message already, Brendan observed. Aye, he concurred, but I think a demonstration is in order. A small taste of dragon fire, and they might just see sense and decide to negotiate, he thought to himself. Even if the chances of a peaceful handover were small, Jon knew he had to try for it. Who is in there? He asked again. Aemon Frey and Jaina Lannister, replied Sarah Brendan. Believe it or not, my lord, our best bet is her rather than him. He's a fucking idiot, but Jaina wasn't born yesterday. She knows what's good for her. How many men? Asked Sharadevos. Brendan didn't sound certain, but Jon breathed a sigh of relief at his answer anyway. 200. We can defeat them easily. Overhead, Rhaegar circled the dragon, letting out another burst of flame that lit up the darkening skies over Riverrun. The Red Fork momentarily shone red and gold in the reflected firelight. Bells suddenly began to toll, and voices raised in panic. It seemed the Lannisters and Freys really had gotten the message. It had reached a point where even Cersei had to admit that Eddard Stark had been right. Winter was coming, and she was freezing to the bone. She sipped her hot, spiced wine and moved her chair closer to the fire, close enough for the flames to reflect in her bright green eyes. Toward the back of the room, Sard Robert Strong shifted in the shadows, the plates of his armor grinding together. The noise set her teeth on edge, but because it was him, she said nothing. Outside, a cold wind whipped in from the black water and rain pattered against her windows, another sign of winter's relentless approach. Inwardly, she prayed for it to pour down and wash away the last smudges of the scepted Baelor, the last greasy stains of Margaery, Tyrell, and her degenerate brother. Each one of those prickling roses had been a thorn in her side, and picking them out, one by one, had given her more pleasure than she could say. Or, at least until she decided it would be best to blast them out all at once for the final time. A soft knock at her door intruded upon her inner thoughts, drawing her attention back into the here and now. Sother Robert answered and stepped aside to admit the guests without saying a word. That was what she liked about him. He never uttered a word. All she had to do was forget what was under that visor, and she could pretend he was the perfect person. Your Grace, forgive our intrusion upon your precious spare time. Maester Qyburn bowed as best he could. I bring more news from the north and the Riverlands. She could have rolled her eyes but resisted the temptation. The north, my favorite. Taking another sip of wine to brace herself for whatever was next, she gestured for Sir Robert to pull up a chair for the maester. While he got settled, she remembered the last time they talked about the North. Sansa Stark had taken it back, killing Ramsay Bolton in the process. The killing had been surprising enough, but the manner of it had her laughing out loud. Her laughter soon died, as more and more reports backed up the original account. While we initially believed House Stark was too demoralized to attack us anywhere else, Qyburn began, it seems they have launched an invasion via the Riverlands. Now Cersei did roll her eyes. Only Sansa Stark could be stupid enough to repeat the same mistakes her brother made. She will fail, Qyburn. And if she does not... She glanced toward Robert Strong. The mountain was now unassailable. There's more, Your Grace, Qyburn said. The dragon people speak of... Varys's former little birds have seen it for themselves. There are simply too many reports of this beast to ignore any longer. Cersei bridled at the suggestion she had been ignoring it. Truth was, they'd been hearing of reports of dragons across the narrow sea for years now. They still hadn't turned up in the flesh in Westeros. I thought Viserys Targaryen was dead, anyway. His own sister killed him, from what I heard. Actually, Qyburn sounded regretful. The name I am hearing is actually Rhaegar Targaryen. There are certain rumors... What those rumors were she didn't hear over the sound of her own laughter. Once she had composed herself, she added, You forget, Qyburn, that I was married to the man who killed Rhaegar Targaryen with his own hammer. Robert saw his body in the river. He smashed the rubies from his breastplate and watched them rushing down the trident. The water was red with Valyrian blood. Qyburn laughed, but it sounded forced and brittle. Quite right, Your Grace. Quite right. But still, there is a large northern army heading our way, taking back the Riverlands and the Vale and growing stronger by the day. Growing stronger, the words repeated in her head. At least she had nipped that rose in the bud. I will send Jaime back to the Riverlands with a force, she ceded. I would have the truth of these rumors for myself. Seemingly satisfied, he bowed out of the room and left her in peace. She sipped her wine, drawing what warmth she could from it. Once, a long time ago, her father had promised her she would marry Rhaegar Targaryen. Elated at the news, she had drawn a picture of him riding a dragon with her behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. It was a childish fantasy. Jaime saw it and asked her what it was meant to be. And she told him it was King Jack Arce and his sister-wife, Queen Alysanne. But childish fantasy or no, when she saw Rhaegar for the first time, she thought him the most beautiful creature who ever walked the realm. Jaime was a green boy by comparison. Then Erase had humiliated her and her father. Not long after that, the wrong king returned from the Trident, and that picture was all she had left of the prince. She still had it, somewhere. Shaking herself down, she sipped her wine and spoke aloud. He is dead. Rhaegar is very, very dead. Silk direwolves fluttered from 1,000 tent poles, spread out around the edge of the woods beyond the Riverrun. By night, the scene was lit up by as many campfires and the air hung heavy with the smell of cooking meat. When dawn broke, a mist of smoke lingered in spectral wisps, pale in the morning light by the time the early birds among their swelling ranks emerged from their tents. Out they stumbled, yawning and stretching, the cold air blowing away the cobwebs of sleep to be greeted by the sight of a fine new gallows pole. Brynden Tully had erected it in full view of the castle. It stood now, stark and ominous against the rising sun, its sinister geometry measured to perfection, the hempen rope slung around the neck of the one man who got no sleep at all these days. Edmure Tully had suffered the same humiliation. Now it was Black Walder's turn. The Lord of the Crossing remained silent and stoic, defying his legendarily awful temper in the face of his kinsman's relative indifference. Rosier had his misgivings about the tactic, and Jon had agreed. But Jon also agreed that the Riverlands were Brynden's domain now, and it wasn't for them to dictate terms to a man who had suffered so much. Nevertheless, Rosier gave the scaffold a wide berth as he went to empty his bladder in the nearest latrine pit at the edge of the woods. They had only been there a week, but already the pit stank to high heavens, and he tried to avoid breathing in as he answered the call of nature. Just beyond the edge of the woods, a clearing had been left by the Lannisters during their siege, not so long ago. It was marked by jagged tree stumps that had been left behind when they made their siege engines and scorpions. Now it was a convenient, out-of-sight, resting place for Sanyur, who also took pleasure in using the tree stumps as scratching posts. He looked like a grotesque cat as he rubbed his scales up and down the stumps. He was still sleeping now, limbed in pale light as his bulk rose and fell in time to his growling snores. For a moment, Rhaegar watched him, his wings stretched over his face. His neck coiled around his body. A small figure stood before him, causing him a moment's worry. Hastily splashing some cool water over his hands, he wiped them dry again on his tunic before rushing over to the figure, getting too close to Sonyer for comfort. Increasing his anxiety, he was certain there was a vast wolf pack roaming these woods. He heard them every night, and not too long ago, he got up one night to piss and could have sworn he saw their eyes glinting from deep within the undergrowth. Right now, however, he was more concerned that the girl didn't get burned alive. "Excuse me," he called. "Be careful. Don't get too close." The dragon stirred, snorting a cloud of smoke, and the girl leapt back in alarm. Up close, he finally recognized Arya. I'm sorry, she blurted out. "I only wanted to look properly. I wouldn't hurt him." He caught a hold of her before she could run past, keeping hold of her to show everything was all right. "Then come and look properly," he said gently. "It's rather like Ghost, really. Safe, so long as the owner is close by." She looked at him for a moment, her gray eyes reflected the light, and a small smile playing on her face. By now, their voices had awoken Sanyar, and he lifted his huge head to study them intently. He sniffed at the newcomer, measuring her up in his beady blue eyes. Over the last few months, he had been eating continuously and growing exponentially, so he towered over them both when he stood. Meanwhile, Arya was hesitant as she took a small step closer to Sanyar. "Years ago, when I was at King's Landing, I saw the skulls in the Dragon Vault," she said, looking back at him. "I didn't know what they were. I thought they were monsters." Rhaegar chuckled. "I suppose they are, in a way. As to the skulls you saw, I'm amazed the usurper Robert Baratheon kept them." She reached out a hand as if to touch the dragon's neck, but her nerve failed, and she pulled away quickly. "They're hidden away, deep in a vault, but I saw them. I hid inside the biggest one." "Balerion," he said. "There was none bigger than Balerion, not even Sanyar. Go on, touch him." She glanced over to him, and he replied with an encouraging nod. Emboldened enough, Arya gently placed her hand against Sanyar's scales, running her palm down his long neck. She gasped, her eyes wide with wonder, as she caressed him ever so softly. She repeated the motion as if she was soothing a family pet dog. "It's very hot. Fire made flesh," he replied. Rhaegar noticed too, and quickly whipped his head up and nudged the girl roughly. Rhaegar tumbled backwards, her feet kicking up as she landed, but she wasn't hurt and made no sound as she fell. "It's all right, stay calm," Rhaegar said, rushing over to help her back to her feet. "Don't let him scare you." To his surprise, Arya stood her ground stoically and looked the dragon in the eye without so much as blinking. She really was like her aunt, he thought to himself. Maybe a little cautious, but fearless when it came to the crunch. He backed off, letting the two of them get more acquainted. "How big will he grow?" she asked. "They never stop growing," he answered. "If they're left to fly free and given enough food, they just get bigger and bigger." Now that Sonyer was awake, Rhaegar deftly hopped up onto his wing joint and used a protruding scale to lever himself up onto the beast's back. Settled between two solid spines, he reached his hand down toward Arya. "Come on," he said. "You're small and skinny enough." Arya hesitated, but her expression was dumbstruck awe. "Men? On the dragon?" Rhaegar stretched out his hand as far as he could. "Why not?" Rhaenyra Targaryen took the little king of the Vale for a ride on Rhaegar's return for his surrender. "As long as I'm with you, Sonya will not harm you." With that assurance, Arya came scrambling up the wing joint just as he had, but the smooth scales made her slide back down again. Not to be deterred, she jumped higher and caught his hand, and he pulled her up and helped her get settled on the dragon's back. He was curious to see if Sanyar was indeed strong enough to carry two now. He certainly had the size, and his temperament was actually quite calm and friendly for a dragon. Lady Sansa briefly flew on him, he said, hoping it would help her relax. She wasn't in control, so it was more like Sanyar took her for a ride. But she managed to kill her ex-husband, which I think was all she was aiming for anyway. Positioned behind him, Arya laughed nervously as she wrapped her arms around his waist. Moments later, she fell still, and he could feel her pressed into his back as she clung for dear life, even before they'd left the ground. "We're going now. Just tell me if you want to land," he said. Twisting his neck to try and get her in sight, he felt her nod, rather than seeing it. Turning back to the dragon, he uttered the Valyrian command to fly, Sovis. Sonyor's clawed feet pounded around the clearing, his talons churning up the earth as he ran in wide circles, gathering momentum. Rhaegar's grip tightened like a vice as the dragon leapt into the air. Huge wings beat at the air, causing the branches to sway and the leaves to rustle as if a sudden storm had broken out around them. Half a heartbeat later, and they were clear of even the trees. From behind him, a stream of expletives was lost among the beating of the wings. The swearing stopped abruptly, a moment's stunned silence, before a loud squeal of euphoria sounded as his passenger's fear was overtaken by the sheer exhilaration of soaring over the world. "We're flying! We're really flying!" Arya cried into the rushing winds. "I can't believe we're flying!" She was still gripping him, but she loosened her hold as she got used to the bizarre sensation, and now that the dragon was safely airborne, Rhaegar was able to turn and face her for a moment. "We're going to fly over Riverrun. Make sure you get a good look inside," he said. Rhaegar had her eyes fixed on the vanishing campsite below, but she tore herself away and met his gaze. "All right, are you going to attack them?" "Only if they attack us," he said. "And that's entirely possible." Sonyor ceased beating his wings and they began to glide smoothly downwards again, swooping closer to Riverrun. From that height, they could see everything going on in the courtyards and grounds within the curtain walls. A dragon was hard to miss at the best of times, but Sonyor's sheer size sent most of the castle's inhabitants scattering faster than usual. Inwardly, Rhaegar was relieved they didn't try to fight, but he could tell Arya was disappointed. She wanted to see his fires. "I'm going to circle a few more times, and I want you to memorize the layout of the castle," he informed her. "Can you do that?" "Of course, but why?" she asked. "Because I want you to change your face, get access to the castle, and cut the drawbridge loose," he replied. "When you do that, I will use Sonyor's firepower to attack the castle. Hopefully, the men will get one look at the fires and flee for their lives. They will flee straight into Jon's battle lines. Are you willing?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I am. I will." They circled the castle, Sonyor's great shadow sweeping across the turrets and the guardhouses as they soared on by. One foolhardy guard attempted to fire an arrow at them, but it fell far short. Some of his colleagues, emboldened by the move, all came rushing to do the same. None of the arrows even came close to the dragon. All the same, "They're attacking us?" Arya pointed out. "Fair enough," he agreed. "Dracarys?" Like the arrows, the jet of flames fell far short of the men at arms, but it was enough for them to get the message, and they fled back inside their tower. There was nowhere else for them to flee to, but Rhaegar hoped, once Arya gave them a way out, they would take it, and the Lannisters and Freys be damned. Driving the message home, he issued the command for fire again. Arya cried out, bouncing in her seat now at the sight of it. "Look what's coming, murderers!" she screamed down at them. "Run! Run now, cravens!" Circling done, he guided the dragon back to camp. Landing in open field next to the battle camp, he slid off first and held his arms open to catch Arya. "How did you like it?" he asked. She was breathless and flushed in the face from the wind. "That was the best thing that's ever happened to me." "Good," he replied, setting her back on her feet. "Because once this is over, I've promised Jon I'll take you back to Winterfell." Jane Sear beamed from ear to ear. "Then let's get it done. I want to go home." Jon emerged from his tent, still sluggish from sleep, and looked to the skies. Shielding his eyes from the rising sun, he counted the two riders. However much he trusted his father's skills with the dragon, he couldn't help but worry about Arya, and he knew it was her. He had discussed it with Rhaegar already. Tearing his gaze away, he left the woods and joined Ser Brynden on the gallows. That made him uneasy too. He had no sympathy for Walder Frey, but he couldn't quite bring himself to support the humiliation all the same. The man was silent now. For the first few days, he had stood there, swearing at everyone, imparted insults, and decried all their mothers as whores they'd their whoresons. No one paid him much attention, which only made him more furious at first. But he gradually grew bored and quietened down. Now he seemed resigned to it, much as Edmure seemed to have done. "My lord," Jon greeted Ser Brynden, "what will we do with him when the attack begins?" "Hang him, for all I care," Tully retorted. "But I suppose we still need him." "I promised I'd save him for my sister," he said, "but I don't want him fleeing at the height of the battle. Better put him back in shackles, if you ask me." Just then, a burst of flame lit the sky over Riverrun, quickly followed by another. None of it seemed to do any damage, but he heard screams and shouts coming from within. "If your lizard roasts my family, fucking shut up," said Brynden, cut over Frey. Turning back to Jon, he continued, "That stoat Emyn Frey threatened to burn that castle to the ground before he left it. Or rather, his wife did. He wouldn't have conceived the idea himself. All the same, it will not do to have that dragon do the job for him." Jon had already thought of that. "I know, my lord, it won't come to that. The men inside that castle will soon see sense and surrender. Come, walk with me." After setting a guard to watch over the prisoner, Brynden agreed. The pair of them walked through the camp, greeting the men who would all too soon be fighting for them. "There's a whole lot of grain in storage at Riverrun," Brynden admitted. "You've seen the state of our farmlands. You know that's all we've got to survive on during the winter." Jon saw the problem. Whatever Rhaegar didn't, he could not take the castle at the expense of that stored grain. There was little he could offer by way of assurances. "Well, let's just hope it won't come to that," he said. "Besides, we're taking the castle by stealth as much as anything." He wasn't sure how to feel about the plan to get Rhaegar involved. It made him uneasy, nervous. Eddard Stark would be livid if he knew. More so if he knew Jon was the one encouraging it. But it was he who presented her with Needle all those years ago. Now was the time for Arya to stick him with the pointy end. Just as that thought crossed his mind, he saw his sister running full pelt towards him. Concerned, he excused himself from Sir Brynden and ran to meet her. However, as they drew together, he could see she was only running through sheer happiness. She almost looked like the child she still was. They met, and she jumped up and threw her arms around his neck, just as she used to when they were both children. For a long moment, he held her tight. "I went up on the dragon," she said, excitably. "You should have seen it, Jon. I went up on the dragon, and it was amazing. We saw everything. We saw inside Riverrun, and all the rivers looked like tiny threads." Seeing her happy made him happy. "Father said he wanted you to get to know the dragon. Anyway, I'm glad you enjoyed the ride. I suppose he also told you the plan." She nodded vigorously. "And I've agreed. I want to do it, Jon. I can use what I learned to take back Riverrun." She had that stubborn look about her, the one no one could argue with, so he didn't waste time trying. "Just make sure you have a bucket of water handy." She frowned, trying to work out why, before dissolving into laughter. Ever since she took the potion, Sansa had been wondering about the things she had seen. She described the baby to the Maester, and quickly got a reply back. Samwell Tarley had met a Wilden girl and brought her and her infant south of the Wall. She knew the name, but only because of Jon. Summerhall, she knew, only because she had seen it for herself. But it led further than Samwell's Wilden girl's baby. "It was that night, wasn't it?" she said, as they ate in the common hall. "Something happened on the night of the fire that brought the others back." She was speaking to Maester Marwyn, but it was Thoros of Myr who answered. "My lady, the others never really went away." "But Summerhall was what brought their powers back into the open," Marwyn suggested. "The night ended in blood, fire, and tragedy. And dragons, magic re-entered the world in the most violent possible way. And these are things beyond the understanding of any fire-addled Targaryens." Only vaguely did Sansa recall the deserter from the Night's Watch, executed by her father before they left Winterfell. He had talked of the others of seeing White Walkers migrating south. That was before Daenerys hatched her dragons. She knew that only left Summerhall, which they had manipulated in time and played a role in. Had they inadvertently brought the others back themselves by hatching Sun Ye? It made her head spin when she thought too much about it. Soon after that, she sat in her chambers and composed a letter to Jon asking him to find the Wood's Witch. She was another piece of the puzzle, she was certain of it, but the one she saw in the visions was a different one. That one had warts and big yellow eyes. Thinking about that made her head hurt too. Belankar, little brother. A little brother would wrap his hands around a queen's throat and kill her. That was what she had said. Rather than tie herself in knots over what it all meant, she wrote it down as best as she recalled it and stashed the papers away for safekeeping. In the meantime, she returned to Jon's letter. Soon she prayed she would be returning to Jon in person. Jonna didn't even ask where Arya had gotten that Lannister livery from, whether it was a lucky find in the woods, or whether she had clobbered a real Lannister messenger on the road and simply stolen it from him. The latter seemed far more likely. Either way, he is glad she had the livery. as well as a brand new face to go with it. Even though that still unnerved him, it was like Arya wasn't Arya anymore, that she just morphed into other people at will. It reminded him of the barriers that now seemed to lie between them. However, pushing all that aside, he watched from a mirrorish far eye as she approached Riverrun from several miles down the road, traveling from the direction of Casterly Rock. The horse she was mounted on was a sturdy little bow-legged Garen, the type always used by messengers wherever they were coming from. All he could see was a red-gold blur as she trotted on by, using her new face. After that, there was nothing to see until she reached Riverrun. Disguised as a harmless messenger, and definitely alone, she was admitted through a postern gate and ushered through the curtain walls. "She's in," he said, lowering the far eye. Turning to Rhaegar, he added, "Get Sonya ready, it's almost time." But time passed, interminably. Seconds ticked by in what felt like hours. Minutes dripped by in days. The sun began to set before commotion could be heard coming from the castles. A window in a guard tower smashed and a body fell from an upper window, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. The drawbridge wasn't lowered. Its ropes were cut and it crashed to earth in a cloud of dust and splinters. Jon's heart leapt into his throat as the fight began in earnest. Rhaegar soared overhead on Sodian, and he knew it was time to form up the cavalry charge. Seconds later, a burst of bright orange and deep red flames seared the sky over the castle, briefly lighting up everything. The screams and shouts from within Riverrun were now answered by the thundering of horses' hooves as Jon gave the command to charge. They descended on Riverrun in a tide of steel armor, lances, and swords drawn as they met the soldiers already fleeing the castle. For his part, Jon only struck at them if they struck at him. Otherwise, he let them retreat with what little dignity they could muster. Meanwhile, overhead, Rhaegar deployed Sonier all over again. A jet of flames split the sky, a burning man fell from the parapets and into the river, while his comrades fled through the newly opened drawbridge. As the Lannisters and Freys fled, Jon and his men rode up to meet them. Many they cut down as they charged toward the castle, ready to take it back for House Tully. Others threw their swords down into the dust at the mere sight of them. The sensible ones, Jon thought to himself. When the first of their numbers breached the walls of Riverrun, Rhaegar withdrew Sonyader's fire and landed with an almighty crash in the castle's forecourt. Jon rushed up to meet him, his blade wet with blood, and clapped him firmly on the back. "Have you seen Arya?" he asked. Rhaegar shook his head. "No." Fighting broke out all around them as Lannister and Frey loyalists tried to stick it out. Made bold by the fact that the dragon had been stood down, some of the deserters even tried to rejoin the fight. But it was too little too late, and the Stark and Riverlands forces soon chased them down, running them into the woods, where a huge pack of wolves stalked the trees hungry for flesh. Jon hacked at the legs of a huge destroyer, bringing it crashing down on top of its owner. The Frey was crushed to death, an old, balding man he had just assumed was a soldier. Either way, he was the enemy, and Jon had no time to trouble his conscience. He jumped the horse and ran back out of the castle walls. Wolves were everywhere. More than he had ever seen. Many were howling. Others were getting stuck into Lannisters and Freys. None troubled the Stark forces. Frowning, he looked along their lines to the huge she-wolf who seemed to lead them. "Nymeria!" he whispered. He didn't even know how he knew it was her. The roar of the dragon pulled Jon back inside the castle. A spear had pierced his scales, but the damage was superficial. Even the man responsible was cut down as Rhaegar swung his sword at the man's head, taking it clean off his shoulders in a spray of vivid red blood. Jon ran to help his father as he took on 3 enemy soldiers at once. But Rhaegar smoothly kicked one of his assailants over a balustrade while elbowing another in the face with one arm, then sticking his sword down the throat of the other. Impressed, Jon laughed and punched him on the shoulder as he dodged by, taking out a Lannister as he went. Up on the battlements, he swung at the remaining archers, getting blood in his eyes and temporarily blinding himself. He spun around, only to be kicked to the ground in a surprise attack he didn't see coming because of the blood in his eyes. Floored, he lay there gasping for breath, watching as Black Walder Frey raised his sword high above his head, a glimmer of supreme satisfaction in his eyes as he braced himself for the kill. Jon barely had time to wonder how he managed to escape before the blow landed. He screwed his eyes shut, waiting to die before it all abruptly stopped. He felt hot liquid spray over his face. He heard the sound of Frey's sword hitting the stones at his side. Slowly, not daring to believe his lucky escape, Jon opened his eyes again. There was Black Walder still above him, but with a long and skinny needle skewered right through the back of his neck, protruding through his apple. Blood bubbled and frothed at his mouth. Slowly his stiffening corpse lurched forward and slid the blade, revealing Arya once more wearing her real face. She smiled down at him, proud as punch. "I stuck him with the pointy end." Jon laughed. Overwhelmed with his own emotions, he lay back and laughed out loud until Arya punched him on the shoulder, jolting him back into his right mind. Come the morning, and the castle was back under Tully control. With the castle came the Riverlands themselves. Aemon Frey was the old bald man Jon had killed while he tried to escape, leaving his Lannister wife to yield the castle, which she had with as much grace as she could muster in shackles. They had lost their valuable Frey prisoner, but a Lannister was worth 100 Freys, Jon reckoned. He smiled to himself and turned to face Arya. "Thank you, little sister." She was taller now, he noticed. Or maybe she just looked that way. "Any time, brother." They would get some sleep, and then they would go their separate ways. Jon would remain at Riverrun, while Rhaegar would take Arya back to Winterfell before he himself flew for Dragonstone. Sora Davos was leaving already. Jon found the old sailor packing up his tent back at the old camp. "You're going already?" he asked. Sorry to see him leave. Sir Davos nodded. "You've not seen the last of me, Jon Snow." He paused, looking up at the sky now a clear blue. "By the time I make it to Dragonstone on land, your father should have had time to deliver your sister and head down to meet me. Seriously, if you think I'm going up on that beast, you can think again." Jon laughed. He knew the offer had been made, but Sir Davos's answer had been beyond emphatic. But now that the moment of separation had come, no matter how briefly, Jon felt only sorrow. "I thank you, Sir Davos, for never giving up on me after the stabbing," he said. "And tell your wife I send her my warmest regards. I hope one day we will all meet again to dine and toast our victory." Sir Davos met his eye. "I don't doubt it, Lord Snow, I don't doubt it for a second." It had been weeks since Jon last wrote A Full Turn of the Moon. Rumors circulated, but until Sansa read it in his own hand, she would not believe it. Others tried to soothe her worries with quiet talk, gentle words spoken in hushed voices. It felt so forced that it only began to irritate her. As always, in times of crisis, she found solace in needlework stitching banners for her men and even a few for her bannermen from other houses. Plenty of materials were being brought in via White Harbor now, so there was no great lack of anything anymore. But even that small comfort was deprived her as she found her mind always wandering back to Jon and what he might be doing. The last she heard, they had left Seagard and Arya had been found. Surely, by now they must have reached Riverrun. For all she knew, they could both be dead and their armies too. That was what it was like with Robb. Initial success, despite the odds, followed by a shock defeat that cost them everything. She tried not to dwell on it, visited the godswood daily, and often twice come evenfall. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood remained at Winterfell. However, they earned their keep in whatever ways they could. Tom O' Strings regaled them with bawdy songs of an evening, and even threw a few romantic numbers in to make Sansa wistful for the girl she once was. Beric helped see to her restless small folk, while Gendry labored in the armory. He toiled day and night in Mikken's old forge, fixing battered breastplate, gauntlets, helms, and shields. He even took sheet metal and forged new ones for her rapidly expanding bannermen. At the same time, he set younger lads to work refining and reforging swords and weapons. He accepted no great payment beyond food and lodgings. She walked past the forge one afternoon, breathing in the familiar smoke and steam pluming from the open door of the forge. Gendry was hard at it, as he always was, but at sight of her, the hammering abruptly ceased. "She'll be all right," he said. Hastily, he added, "Milady." Normally, he never spoke to her at all, and that was why she hesitated before answering. She didn't even know if it was her he was addressing. "Your sister," he continued, looking at the floor. "Lady Arya, she'll be all right." Sansa glanced around as if he still might be talking to someone else, but she found the reassurance strangely touching. Thank you," she replied. "I pray you're right." Finally, he dared look at her, meeting her gaze with those bright, Baratheon blue eyes. He was truly Robert's son. He even had Robert's build. "I knew your father," she said. "He was While she struggled to find suitably delicate words, he finished for her. "A fat, womanizing, drunken sot," he answered, just the hint of a smile on his face. "I met your father once, came to the forge in King's Landing. He seemed like a good man." The conversation had ended there, and she returned indoors to where her mother sat by the fire. Later that night, she found herself wondering why Ned Stark was visiting Robert's bastards in their workplaces. But she supposed it no longer mattered. Come the morning, she was awoken by the guards sounding the horns again. 2 long blasts tore her from sleep, and she stumbled to the windows to see what was going on. She was up high enough to see over the curtain walls, but there was no one approaching on land. The horizon was clear, but for a large black shadow sweeping over the virgin white snows that carpeted the countryside. The shadow spread its wings and soared, growing smaller as the real thing neared the ground. Rhaegar. She dressed hurriedly, not waiting for her maids to come. She pulled a tunic over her head and struggled into her petticoats. Grabbing the first gown that came to hand, she pulled it on herself and laced from the front. Still barefoot, she ran out of the chamber and down the turnpike stairs into the main keep. By the time she made it outside, Rhaegar was sliding down from the dragon's back. Instead of coming over to her, he remained at Sonar's side and held his arms open. When Sansa came closer, she saw the second person. Smaller, with chestnut brown hair knotted into a bun, the girl landed in the prince's arms. Arya. Sansa hadn't meant to scream her sister's name, but she had, and now it echoed back at her from around the empty yards. Not caring anyway, she hitched the hems of her skirts and ran barefoot through the snow. Arya took a running jump into her arms, both of them catching each other, falling into the snow and refusing to let each other go. Without Arya, Rhaegar, and Sir Davos by his side, Jon felt surprisingly alone at Riverrun. He dined with Brynden at the high table every mealtime, but he was busy righting the Frey wrongs and dealing with his small folk the rest of the time. Occasionally he made attempts to talk to Brienne of Tarth, only that was like drawing blood from a stone. An unexpected highlight came when she offered to spar with him in the yard. Having seen her in action, he knew she was no pushover, and when he readily agreed, he retired to bed. That evening covered in cuts and bruises, aching all over in the best possible way. Over the following weeks, their sparring matches became a regular fixture that had begun to draw a crowd. It even led to her talking a little more. "They say a Lannister party has been seen approaching," she said, helping him tidy up after one of their sessions. "You know she'll send Sir Jaime." Jon had already guessed as much. "If he's here under a peace banner, then it's our duty to give him a fair hearing. The same applies to anyone." She paused before speaking, frowning as if fighting some internal struggle. "He's a good man, my lord. He's not like the others." "Well," he replied, "we'll soon find out, won't we?" And he wasn't kept waiting for long. A few days later, the Tully scouts were proved right, and silk lions were soon appearing over the crest of the hills rolling southwards. Jon watched them approaching alongside Sir Brynden, up on the battlements. From his vantage point, he could only count 6 of them, and a white flag was prominent among the scarlet and golden lions. Still, neither he nor Sir Brynden let down their guard. For all they knew, the entire Lannister army was hidden just beyond view in the woods and down the hills, ready to spring a surprise attack. Despite Brienne's assurances, Jon would only talk to the man if he agreed to enter Riverrun alone, or with 1 guard at most. He had met Sir Jaime once. It was when King Robert visited Winterfell, bringing 3 Kingsguard with him. The others were Meryn Trant and Sir Boris Blunt. Despite the white cloak he wore, Jon thought Jaime was the king. Only for a split second, but he remained the very image of a king as Jon imagined them. His hair was as golden as his armor. He was mounted on a fine destrier, and he was young, fit, and strong, the absolute antithesis of everything Robert was. Using the far eye, Jon tried to pick him out again from among his companions. However, it was impossible, and the features of all the approaching men remained fuzzy at best. Still, he watched as they drew closer and closer, until they were near enough to declare their business. This part of the business he was happy to let Sir Brynden deal with, while Jon joined Brienne in the outer hallway, ready to greet the newcomer. If he agreed to enter alone, barely an hour later the drawbridge lowered and the portcullis raised, Jon found himself face to face with a mere shadow of the man he remembered from Winterfell. His right hand was gone, replaced by a useless-looking golden model. All that golden hair had been shorn off, and he was barefaced to boot. Even his face looked sunken in, and his eyes hollow from lack of sleep. Those same hollow eyes briefly raked over Jon before turning to Brienne, where the gaze lingered. Lady Brienne, he greeted her first, before turning to Jon. Lord Commander, be welcome, Sir Jaime, Jon replied. Brienne held her customary silence, watching as Jaime struggled to unbuckle his sword belt. As a customary gesture of goodwill, he left it propped against the wall to show he meant no harm. Following suit, Jon did likewise with Longclaw and Brienne with Oathkeeper. Oathkeeper, that had once been ice, Jon reminded himself. But when he and Jaime repaired to talk, Brienne remained outside guarding the door to the solar they had commandeered. Inside, the sigils and words of House Lancer were still emblazoned on every surface, making Jon ill at ease. Suddenly, he felt like he was the one on enemy territory. Once Jaime sat down, Jon handed him bread and salt. While you're within these walls, we extend guest right, he informed the knight. As you well know, we take our guest rights seriously in the north. A pity we're not in the north then, Jaime replied. All the same, I give my thanks. All the same, he took the bread and salt while a servant poured them wine. Jon turned toward the door, wondering where Sir Brynden had gotten to. It really should have been him leading these negotiations within Riverrun, not Jon, but there was no sign of the man, and Jon stepped up to the challenge. They sat facing each other from across an ornate table carved with the insignia of House Tully, seemingly one of the few items Emmon Frey kept. Between them, a solitary candle guttered erratically, lighting up the dark stubble lining Lannister's jawline. The only part of him that remained unchanged from Jon's memory was the bright green of his eyes. They caught the light now, glittering like wildfire. I want you to know, Sir Jaime, I am not here to threaten your sister's crown, he began. At this stage, my intention is to restore order to the Riverlands, return Riverrun to its rightful owners, and raise an army to take back to the north. You say you aren't threatening Queen Cersei, yet you're usurping her authority, by your own admission, by undoing all the work she's done in the Riverlands. It wasn't for you to restore order, not that it needed restoring in the first place. The Lannister run the Riverlands, not the Freys. It was the Lannisters, Jon corrected him. It is now back in the hands of the Tullys, as it was in the hands of the Tullys since the Ironborn were driven out all those centuries ago. Do you think Cersei will be any safer on the Iron Throne with the Riverlands in the hands of the Freys in the north and the hands of the Boltons? The truth is, Jaime, that not a single noble house in this realm supports your sister. Jaime drew back from the light of the candle, flinching under the weight of the truth. He was no fool, Jon knew. Like Tyrion, he would not deny a hard truth, only for it to creep up in the night and snip away his one remaining hand. We have the Lannister army, and no one else, Jon cut in. The towers have gone to Daenerys Targaryen and brought the Martells with them. The Vale is allied with House Stark, as is the Riverlands. Whatever's left of the Stormlords will rally to House Stark just as they always have. You are surrounded, and you have no escape but the Iron Islands, and they only fight for themselves. In fact, even half of them have joined Daenerys Targaryen, but if you would listen to me and support me, I will use what influence I can to keep all of them away from the capital and your sister. Yayain frowned. Ned Stark's bastard. What influence do you have? I am Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, he pointed out. And I know what's marching on the wall. There's a war coming made from an army far greater, far more powerful than all the seven combined. If we don't unite to fight them, we will all die. What are you talking about? Jaime cut in. Jon was about to answer when another voice sounded. I've seen it too. I've seen what's coming. Jon turned to where Brienne had entered the solar and now stood in the doorway. She was fixing Sir Jaime with a hard look, unflinching and unblinking. I took Lady Sansa north of the wall to be reunited with her brother, she continued, entering the room properly. I saw the others White Walkers with my own eyes. I saw them raise the dead, using them to attack the living. Death only feeds their armies. The more they kill, the greater they become. Listen to him, Jaime. He speaks truly. The war against winter is coming, and there will be nowhere to hide when it arrives. James shook his head, disbelieving. This is madness. It's the truth, and your sisters should be bloody grateful for it, Jon interjected. If it hadn't been for this war coming, we'd all join together and smash House Lannister to the dust. But if we ignore what's coming, we'll all be equally dead together. If you have half the wits you were born with, you would earn the goodwill of the people and join us in the coming war. Iron Throne be damned. And this army of the dead, said Jaime, how will it get past the wall? There are less than 1,000 men holding that wall, and it stretches from coast to coast. How long do you think they'll hold out? They've no men, no money, no equipment, and no support. Jon paused again, hoping that what he had said sunk in. If House Lannister refuses to acknowledge the coming threat, I will have no choice but turn my armies on you. You can tell your sister that she can support us, or we will overthrow her and take back this realm for the sake of the wars to come. Brienne stepped around the table to join Jaime. She knelt, making one final appeal. Daenerys Targaryen is coming with a vast fleet, a huge army, and 3 adult dragons. Lord Commander Snow has the rest of the realm behind him, and another adult dragon. Join us and live. Or bury your head up your sister's arse, pretending none of this is happening. Do that, and you'll die alongside her on that stupid iron chair. Jaime's eyes widened as he turned to look at her. Not only had she said more in the last few minutes than in the whole time he had known her, she spoke with conviction. Moreover, she wasn't done yet. Yaxlik, do you remember what you told me at Harrenhal that day in the baths, she asked. Do you remember how you sacrificed your honor to save a city full of innocent people? Listen to Lord Commander Snow and win your honor back by helping us save humanity. Jon had no idea what she was talking about, but Jaime clearly did. His expression was anguished as he leaned in to take her hand, but he couldn't seem to speak. He wet his lips, turning to meet Jon's gaze. This is really happening, he said, more of a statement than a question. I'll talk to her, I'll talk to Cersei and tell her what's happening. But if she won't listen, what will you do? Dan was unequivocal. We'll overthrow her and take the realm. My only hope is that we'll have time to do that before the others come. Jaime nodded. And who do you propose to name king in her place? There's 3 contenders, Jon replied. 3 strong contenders, all descended from House Targaryen. Tell her that and make her understand. As soon as the rest of my army gets here, I will make for Dragonstone. If you wish to parley again, you can find me there. He was about to walk out of the door before stopping and looking back. One more thing, your Aunt Jenna is being housed in private apartments here at Riverrun. Sir Brendan would be more than willing to trade her for Lord Yadmir. Let us stop this ridiculous upheaval and restore everything to the way it should be. With that, he left. The talks had left him more tired than he realized, weary already, and the fight hadn't even begun. As for whether Jaime succeeded in convincing Cersei, he couldn't say whether he wanted it or not. If she agreed, it would mean leaving her as Queen of the 7 Kingdoms, something nobody wanted, least of all him. So Rhaegar's face was expressionless as she looked at her mother. She almost shied, reaching for Sansa's hand. However, Sansa was used to it now and gave her sister time to take it all in. All in all, things hadn't gone as well as she had hoped. Arya had been frosty with Gendry, who she felt had abandoned her. She bristled at the sight of the Hound, whom it seemed she had no wish to ever see again, and now she feared to approach her own mother. "Mother," said Sansa, "look who's come home." Catelyn lowered her hood, revealing her brittle white hair and ravaged face. It had been Arya who pulled her out of the river, while warging into Nymeria. But Sansa suspected she thought it was nothing more than a dream until this moment, when the irrefutable evidence was right in front of her. For her part, Sansa was quick to explain that it wasn't her who had turned their mother into this. That was the wonder of Roxlia. Alone. As ever, Catelyn was a woman of few words. She reached for her throat and plugged the slash wound as best she could. "Ah," she said, pausing for a rattling breath before tackling the second syllable. "Yeah." Her whole body shook as she held her arms open to her youngest daughter. Steeling herself, Arya approached hesitantly before embracing her mother. Sansa left them to it for a while, taking up a seat beside the fire while Arya explained how they had taken back Riverrun. Half dead as she was, it could still only be the best possible news to their mother. Meanwhile, Arya spoke in a hushed voice, as if she were addressing an ancient lackwit. When she rejoined the conversation, Sansa turned to find her mother, still holding Arya, cradling her face and looking deep into her eyes. It was as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "I told you Jon would find her and have her brought home," she said. "And now I can bring you home too. Home to Riverrun." "Yes," Arya agreed, squeezing her mother's hands. "Home, where you belong, and when this is all over, me and Bran will come to visit you. We can all be together again." It was hard to tell what Catelyn thought of that. Her mangled face, despite its bloody ruin, remained oddly expressionless. "Come morning I will be leaving and Arya will be holding Winterfell for House Stark," she explained. I think she'll be a good lady of Winterfell, don't you? Catelyn nodded, placing one hand gently on Arya's head, muttering some soundless blessing. King, Queen. She rose to her feet unsteadily and moved to a cabinet at the back of her chambers. Once, in a different lifetime, this had been Sansa's bedroom. It felt oddly fitting that they had swapped places. When she returned, she had Robb's old bronze crown in her hands. Sansa could see the little swords jutting upwards, catching the light and turning coppery. Kin, she said again, pressing it into Sansa's hands. You want me to take this? She asked. Catelyn nodded. Although she didn't think Jon would want such an ill-fated crown, she took it all the same, if only to spare her mother's feelings. That evening, she and Arya dined together in her private solar away from the crowds gathered in the common hall. Together they talked, recalling the past and the days when they fought like wildcats in heat. They had been as bad as each other, and now, years later, they were as emphatic as each other in their apologies. Still, it wasn't all bad. Sansa remembered the time they had a snowball fight and she had no snowballs of her own to throw. So Arya made her some before chasing her round the castle grounds until they were both blue in the face. She wished they had stayed that way. She wished they had never left. I've called our banners, she said. We're going to be back at war, just like before. You're doing the right thing, Arya assured her. House Lannister must be destroyed. But how can I do it without sacrificing the lives of Northmen? She wondered aloud. Without sacrificing any lives unnecessarily. This realm has bled enough, and I will not make enemies of the people by making it bleed again. Arya paused, setting down her fork for a second. I don't know, but these days you seem to be quite clever. You'll think of something. Sansa thought about what she had said for a moment, trying to decide whether it was a compliment or not. Frowning, she said, You mean I wasn't clever before? Arya shrugged. Said it yourself, didn't you? Her jaw dropped. You don't have to agree. She picked up a green bean and slung it at Arya's head, laughing. Arya gasped, quickly returning fire with a spoonful of mashed turnips. Before long, both of them were laughing, chasing each other around their father's old solar. For one precious moment, it was as if nothing had ever changed. Rhaegar jolted, as the dragon hit the ground, buckling his knees to absorb the impact. He slid down off the beast's back, letting his feet sink into the wet sand. Behind him, the sea lapped the shore, and above him, Dragonstone towered over him. Home, he said, patting Sonar's flanks. We're home at last. The tide caught him, a wave washing over his boots. Taking nature's hint, he led the dragon over the sand, toward the curtain walls of the castle. Shielding his eyes from the setting sun, he looked up into the guard tower. At first, no one appeared, but minutes later, a welcome and familiar face peered down at him. The face bobbed out of view, appearing again moments later with something in his hands. He shook out the Targaryen standard, hanging it proudly from the top of the watchtower. The three-headed dragon advertised the return of their masters. 18 years had passed since Rhaegar had last set foot in Dragonstone. It was a hard fact he kept forgetting, since it felt like only months. However, all around him lay reminders of the house that had unseated his own, proving the truth if ever he sought to try and ignore the passing of time. The fiery heart and crowned stag was dotted all around him. It was engraved in the silverware and carved into the wooden beams of what had been his bedchamber. There was even a new stained glass window bearing Stannis' sigil, where once the three-headed dragon had stood proud. To block it out, he closed the shutters and laughed at the Targaryen sigil, still carved in the old weirwood. The rest was not so easy to ignore, but he did his best. His banners once more hung from the battlements, and a flag flew from the tops of the towers, and the stone drum keep. A stream of curious small folk trickled down from the slopes of the Dragonmont, timidly trying to find out what was happening. Some of them asked after Princess Shireen. Where was she? Had she returned to claim her inheritance? Sir Davos broke the news gently, seeming to cause genuine grief. Poor old Stannis barely warranted a mention. Stannis wasn't what you would call a people person. Your Grace, Sir Davos said to him not long after his return. But he was a good lord to those small folk. He would have no undue hardship befall his people. Rhaegar tried to be magnanimous. There's no harm in being respected rather than liked, Sir Davos. In fact, being liked is quite useless without also being respected. However, if there was anyone who commanded neither respect for fealty, it was the Red Woman. He soon learned that the small folk feared her, and he was quick to reassure them. She was staying in the north, That alone seemed to endear him back to his own people, none of whom remembered him. But it had been 18 years, and life on Dragonstone was as harsh and short as anywhere else for the small folk. The few elders who did survive took for him Viserys, if they took him for anyone at all. As long as they have work and food in their children's bellies, they don't much care whose banners fly from the battlements, said Ser Davos after one of their walkabouts. Not that I mean to give offense, your grace. You don't give offense, Rhaegar assured him. You speak only the truth, and I have a job in mind for these people already. Paying them in Stannis' engraved silverware and remaining gold, he set the able-bodied men to work mining obsidian from within Dragonmont. The women and children he paid in old gold reserves to fill sacks with obsidian they found scattered all through the island, rather than sending them into dark and dangerous mines. The gold was no longer legal tender, but it could still be melted down to fetch a sum from dealers on the mainland. Before long, he had his own little system going with assistance from the Lords of the Vale. Obsidian was harvested from Dragonstone and sent on to Gulltown. From Gulltown, it was then transported to Eastwatch by the sea, where the Night's Watch could fashion it into whatever weapons they needed to fend off the others. For now, it was all he could do to plug the gap in the Watch's defenses until the dragons were united. Meanwhile, Ser Davos stayed at his side, briefing him and keeping him up to date on the outside world. Your son, Prince Jon, has left Riverrun to meet with Lady Sansa at the crossroads, he said. Lady Stark and her host were last seen overrunning Harrenhal, where it looks like she'll be leaving the bulk of her army. That made sense. It saved them both an unnecessarily long journey by meeting at Riverrun. Meanwhile, he pointed to a spot on the map where Sansa and Jon would meet. It was where the King's Road branched off in 4 different directions, opposite the inn at the crossroads. Also, Ser Davos continued, an unknown fleet has been spotted approaching from the east. We think it might be your sister. Rosier's nerves twisted uncomfortably. Now that the moment was almost at hand, he realized he hadn't the faintest idea of what he would say to her. She's coming here expecting to conquer and be queen. Now I must turn around and say to her, oh, sorry, there's been a mistake. I'm alive and my son's alive. But feel free to sacrifice your men so we can defeat the unstoppable ice monsters. Ser Davos sat beside him at the painted table, looking out over the wooden seas painted in vivid blues. I have no reports on what sort of a person Daenerys Targaryen is. Either way, I cannot say I envy you. There was no delaying it either. As soon as he saw the approaching fleet for himself, he sent out one of Stannis' old ships, now resplendent in Targaryen sails, to greet the advance party. From the top of the Windworm Tower, looking through a Myrish far eye, he caught sight of the dragons before he caught sight of his sister. 2 were roughly the size of Sonar, but the third was monstrously huge. Gods, Ser Davos, that black one is Balerion Reborn, he said, voice barely above a whisper. A brisk wind swept in off the sea, tugging their hair and clothes, momentarily blocking the far eye. When the lens cleared again, he saw the tiny figure crouched low against the dragon's back, white gold hair streaming behind her. Gods be good, she's bonded with that monster. Beyond the distinctive color of her hair, it was impossible to discern her features from that distance. It stuck out against the gray sky and the black scales of her mount. And frankly, even the mountain would look small on the back of that dragon. The other 2 flew in formation behind her, riderless but perfectly in time with the other. Together, they circled over the ships, drawing ever closer. Just land, he inwardly urged her. The waiting was excruciating. To distract himself from what was happening and how long it was taking, he ran down the steps of the tower and out into the yard below. The gates were already open, the banners of House Targaryen already flying, so he gathered up what few household staff he could muster to form a reception on the shoreline. Ser Davos had joined him, fidgeting relentlessly with a loose thread in his doublet. Here she comes, your grace. I hope you've got your explanations ready. There was an uncomfortable squirming in his belly. I don't think I'll ever be ready, Davos, but the moment is here. Go to port and help guide the ships in. Ser Davos gave him a reassuring clap on the back before carrying out the order. And for the first time, Rhaegar noted the size of the fleet. So close to shore, he could see the Martals and the Tyrells, even the Krakens of House Greyjoy. Leading the way were his own, House Targaryen. In the end, he was so busy watching the ships, it was only something vast and black as onyx dropping before his line of sight that jolted him out of it. A cloud of dry sand plumed as the dragon hit the ground, but the girl didn't hesitate as she disembarked. She stood alone, looking at them in slight puzzlement. Her bare feet were sinking in the sand, but she didn't seem to notice. "This is it," he told himself. "Daenerys Targaryen, Dragonstone is yours." Her hair was in a plait that reached her hips, offset by the black velvet gown she wore. A scarlet dragon stood out against the laced bodice. She looked like his mother, their mother. Behind her, the first of the great galleys was docking in the nearby port. Others, the Martells among them, were sailing on already. "I see you were expecting me," she replied, stepping closer. "May I ask who you are?" He couldn't decide whether it would be best to break it gently or just spit it out. "They told you I was dead," he began uncertainly. "But I am your brother, Prince Rhaegar." She was silent for a moment, the shock registering in her lilac eyes. "You mock me, Seer, dishonor my brother's name again, and I'll have my Drogon deal with you." The dragon lifted its head at the sound of his mistress's voice, turning its beady eye in Rhaegar's direction. The dragon was bound to her heart and soul. Just one word, and he'd be burned to a cinder. "I'm not mocking you," he persisted, keeping an eye on the dragon. The other two landing farther down the beach, seeking shelter beneath a natural archway formed from the rock. "And if you're surprised to see me here, I was quite surprised to find myself here too." Dame Sarys ventured closer. Her eyes narrowed now. It was impossible to even guess at what she was thinking, but he could see the disbelief in her eyes. "My father had 2 sons and a bastard. For all I know, I am no bastard," he pointed out curtly. "I am Rhaegar." An old man choked on his name as if it were a chicken bone lodged in his throat. Rhaegar turned to look at him properly, studying his features closely. It took only a second, but even that delay shamed him. He should have known right away. "Sir Barristan," he greeted his old friend, silently praying he would not flee in fear. But he was the one who was scared. "Sir Barristan, please tell her." From the tail of his eye, he could see Daenerys looking from him to Barristan and back again, looking increasingly angry. "Sir Barristan, who is this man?" she demanded sharply. "Is he who he says he is? What madness is this?" Saxel Barristan stepped around her, closing the gap between himself and Rhaegar in one stride. He took Rhaegar's throat in one gauntleted hand, tilting his chin up with some force, turning his face aside to look from both sides. For a moment Rhaegar wished he could be swallowed by the sea. "What?" he began, before trailing off as words failed him. His blue eyes flashed with anger and disbelief. "How? I saw you die. I saw you fall into the waters. I heard you say her name as you died." Rhaegar squirmed, trying to escape his old friend's grasp. When Barristan released his hold, it was so sudden he almost fell down. He met the older man's gaze, seeing the tears in his eyes for the first time. Turning away, he whispered in Daenerys' ear something he could not hear. "How did you survive?" asked Barristan, turning back to Rhaegar. "I didn't," he answered. "I was brought back by a priestess of R'hllor." "It can be done," Daenerys said, stepping closer to him. "Is it true? Are you my brother?" "That's Rhaegar, all right," Sir Barristan stated. "I'd know him from 100 feet away." He unfastened the jacket he was wearing, tossing it into the sand. He then unbuttoned his shirt to expose his belly. Although the worst of the damage Robert had done had been mended by the fires, there was still a pale pink scar running from his breast to his hip, complete with a large dent where the hammer had crashed into his ribs. "Here is where the usurper hit me," he said. "But she brought me back, that priestess. She said it was the will of R'hllor, and I don't know why. All I know is I'm back, and it's been almost 20 years. Sir Barristan choked again, seemingly torn, burying his face in his hands for a second. He looked up again and drew a deep breath. "I don't know why, either. What I do know is that seeing you again has filled a hole in my life I'd almost forgotten was there." As quick as Rhaegar thought his old friend might punch him in the face, he had his arms around and was gripping him in a rough bear hug. Relief washed over him as he returned the hug, feeling only the cold steel. With little to no point at all in having Sansa leave the King's Road, diverting across the Riverlands, only to return that same way later, Jon traveled to meet her at the crossroads. He left Ser Brynden holding Riverrun with his forces, waiting to see if Ser Jaime honored his promise to swap Lady Jenna for Lord Edmure. He brought a skeleton force with him to add to the army raised by Sansa, drawn up from houses Mallister and Tully, mainly. Enough to bulk his retinue without slowing him down needlessly. Only once did he divert, south of Harrenhal, down a beaten path he remembered from the past and up a steep hill. It was the dead of night. By the time he reached the top of that seemingly endless hill, he waited for her there, in the same spot the children were massacred, and the sacred trees had been cut to little more than jagged stumps. Knowing what he knew now, he could survey the scene around him only with sadness. Even when the little dwarf women appeared seemingly from thin air, Jon was not startled. He had been expecting her from the first moment he set foot on the hill that morning. "Do you remember me?" he asked. "Death comes marching on the wall," she grumbled. "So you come marching on my hill." He watched her enter the circle of weirwood stumps, impervious to the cold wind now blowing all around them. Her flew all about her face, often hiding her shining red eyes, still wearing those rags he had seen her in all those years ago. Unless he were much mistaken, snow would be imminent, and she would freeze. Snow in the southern riverlands. Winter is coming, and it's coming for them all. "I seek your help," he admitted. "This time, I remembered to bring wine." He tugged the wine skein off his hip, handing it straight to her. She accepted it without a word, pulling the cork out with her few remaining teeth before drinking deep. By the time she stopped, she had wine trickling down her chin. "You brought me to Summerhall, do you remember?" he asked. To be even with her, he had to kneel in the soft earth. "I asked you why I had to be the one to save Rhaegar, and you laughed. You told me I had to find out for myself. And now you know," she cut in, abruptly. "Nothing you do is news to me. The old gods give me no peace." On and on and on. They talk all night. Jon hesitated, wondering what the gods were telling her. For years he had prayed before the heart tree, and not hear so much as a whisper. Suddenly, he was the center of their attention. He couldn't escape the feeling he was being used. "How do we defeat the others?" He hoped a straightforward question would bring a straightforward answer. "The same way they were created," she answered. "With fire and blood." "Dragon fire," he said. "Is that it? We just roast them with dragon fire? You forget the blood?" "Their blood, surely," he said. The old crone laughed a laugh that suggested he had missed some secret jest. After composing herself, she drank the rest of his wine. "Aye, their blood," she repeated. "You have their brother. You know what you must do already, Jon Targaryen. You just don't want to admit it to yourself. Such a dishonor. But what is the life of one babe against the fate of humanity?" "They were Craster's sons," he remembered. "I saw them leave the boys out as an offering to the gods." "All but one," she said. "Gelly's baby, the other that got away. Am I supposed to sacrifice this child?" The thought of it turned his stomach. "Because I won't. There must be some other way." "They're coming for him," she said. "Use his blood. Use your head first." With the whole of humanity at stake, he thought she might stop talking in riddles. Alas, he was not in luck. Deciding he would wring no more sense from this one, he got up to leave only to be stopped by the sound of her voice. "I knew you were coming. The old gods showed you to me. I saw you at a wedding feast. At your side was the one younger and more beautiful. The groom I saw cloaked his bride in betrayal, and I saw the little brother moving through the walls. You came a guest. You left a king." He paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. "You're mad." He had told her that once before. They sat facing each other from across a small table. Between them sat a bottle of wine and a single guttering candle. The windows were shuttered, showing them the rearing stag of House Baratheon, encased in a fiery heart. Rhaegar had already given away the silver cups in exchange for the small folks' bags of obsidian, leaving them with earthenware vessels. At least they didn't have that stag on them. "Where is your son now?" she asked. "I suppose I am expected to kneel to him." "He expects nothing of the sort," he answered. "I know this must be difficult for you to come all this way and find two others in your place. One you thought dead, the other you never knew existed." She laughed mirthlessly. She didn't need to say anything. He had listened to her story of growing up in exile, a lifetime of poverty and fear, running from assassins and fleeing from city to city, all with Viserys spiraling into madness. Often Rhaegar had wondered what happened to him. No one seemed to know. His death at the hands of the Dothraki was only surprising in that Viserys was riding with a horde at all. Still, she had built herself up from nothing, living on only her wits. "I thought of you often," she admitted. "Viserys talked about you all the time. I only found out Mother was pregnant shortly before the Trident," he explained. "Father, Jaime Lannister told me—" "What?" she cut in. "What about our father and Jaime Lannister?" Rhaegar hesitated, not sure whether he should say anything. But after the everything she had been through, She deserved the truth. Toward the end, when father was burning practically everyone, he was getting aroused by it, he explained. Afterwards, he would rape her. Jaime told me he wanted to protect her, but the other Kingsguard stopped him. It was his duty to protect her, but not from him. Daenerys stiffened, fortifying herself with a good gulp of wine. Is that why Lannister killed him? Mother was gone by then. Father had Elia and the older children as hostages, he recalled. But even if things had been different, father would have had to die. Pausing for breath, he sipped at his wine and marshaled his thoughts. I would have ordered someone to do it myself. If his words had shocked her, she showed no reaction. Nor did she speak for a long moment as she gazed into the depths of her cup. Is Lyanna back? No, he answered. I don't think she was part of Rhaegar's master plan. Master plan? She asked, head cocked to one side. It is us three, he replied. You, me, and Jon, the three of us working together. It's a long story. The dragon has 3 heads, she said. After the dragons were born, I stayed in court and visited the House of the Undying. I saw visions and you were there. You said, the dragon has 3 heads. Even though you weren't really there, it still felt you were talking directly to me. Rucker chuckled. After everything I've learned these past months, I could well have been talking right at you even if I wasn't real. Daenerys rose abruptly to her feet, walking over to the shuttered windows. It was dark outside, so she didn't bother opening them. She seemed quite content to just stare, chewing on a nail as she thought. He watched her, wondering what was going on in her head. When she looked back at him, a tear had leaked down her face. Dragons don't cry, she began. Rhaegar went to her, holding her for the first time. Dragons may not, but people do. He had been worried that she would fight him off. Initially she hardened, but soon sagged and held him back. She was shaking like a dying leaf. You've destroyed every plan I had, she confessed. But now you're here, and you're my family. And I've never had a family before, only Viserys, and he was... mad, he finished for her. He was the mad one, and I saw that coming, even when he was little. She extricated herself from him, looking into his eyes so intensely it was as if she was trying to study his very soul. You're not like him, are you? He shook his head. I am nothing like him. Neither of us are. Nodding agreement. She began pacing again. The heels of her boots rang against the stone floor. The dragon has 3 heads, but now there are 4, she said. He had introduced her to Sonar earlier. The more the merrier, I suppose. I think it only refers to dragon riders, he clarified. There are 3 of us now, and we must work together as one. All those things I told you about the North are true, sister. We can take the realm now and set ourselves up as kings and queens. But it won't matter when the winter brings the long night and death comes marching on the wall. We are more important than any throne. She perched on the edge of the table, still looking downcast. I need time to think. It's so much to take in. I know, he replied, but you know I want no crown. Even after all this is over, if I'm still around, I want nothing from either of you. If you're still around, she asked, looking worried. Prophecy doesn't make us immortal, he pointed out. The coming war is going to be the most violent we've ever known. 4 dragons deployed in the north didn't seem enough. Even if Jon did learn to ride before then, they would be spread too far over too great a distance. And Daenerys hadn't even committed to the cause. So, will you join us? He asked. What comes next? Who sits the Iron Throne? Just doesn't matter. There was a long pause, and the expression on her face said, I love you already, but I hate your guts. Eventually she nodded. I'm with you, but I don't know what to do. If it helps, I'll give you some time to think, he replied. Daenerys' lip trembled. I don't want you to go. Stay and wait for your son. My nephew. I never dreamed I would have a brother and a nephew waiting for me here. But Seagard had made up his mind. He had made it up long ago, before he even left Winterfell. He'd spent the last few months watching this moment draw closer on the horizon. No matter what happens, Dragonstone is yours, he replied. Use the time to settle in and meet your new small folk. They'll need you. But where are you going? When will you be back? I'm going to see an old friend, that's all, he assured her. She was still curious. Who? Rhaegar smiled, ruefully. Cersei Lannister. It was even fall by the time Sansa reached the crossroads. Many moons ago, she had lost Lady here. Arya had thrown Joffrey's sword in the river, and Nymeria had been forced to flee. If she looked, on a clearer and lighter day, she might even have been able to see Castle Derry, where it had all happened. This evening, however, there was to be no parting of the ways. In fact, it was quite the opposite. She spurred her courser into a gallop, separating from the rest of her host for the last mile or two of the journey. Her heartbeat raced as they charged through the countryside, the wind whistling in her ears as she went. Only when the crossroads came into view did she slow to a trot and then a walk as she drew closer. Just as he had promised in his last letter, Jon was waiting for her there. He was reclining against the roadside verge, his horse loose but close by, cropping at the grass. His eyes were closed, arms folded behind his head. Dismounting her horse in one smooth motion, she landed softly on her feet. Just enough noise to stir him from his doze. He looked exhausted, but in that moment, and after so long apart, he may as well have been Florian made flesh. They held each other's gaze for a moment before falling into each other's arms. And when they kissed, she never wanted it to end. At the insistence of Ser Davos, Rhaegar waited until the moon had turned and they sailed in darkness. All around their little fishing boat, the waters of the Blackwater Bay rolled in inky blackness. Even their oars were covered in velvet, and their sail was black, and they hugged the coastline as close as they dared. As they entered Blackwater Rush, above them the Red Keep loomed, black and solid and blotting out the stars. Rhaegar tried to pick out the rooms he knew, but it was too dark to see. As luck would have it, the passage he sought he knew like the back of his hand. He could find his way through it, blindfolded, even on a night as dark as this. In a different lifetime, he had tried to smuggle Arya and the children out via the same route. More recently, Sansa Stark had made use of it when she needed a quick getaway. But that gave him pause for thought. If she had used it, how many others knew of it? Given how easily she had gotten away, the answer was probably not many. Still, a shadow of doubt darkened his sense of certainty. Gout didn't have much time to test his nerve before they bumped against the small harbor wall, or rather the rocky outcrop that passed for a harbor. Ser Davos pressed his finger to his lips, signaling for them to remain silent until they disembarked. As he had mentioned 100 times, sound carried on water, and even a whisper could betray their whereabouts. However, once they were ashore, the rock face was there to absorb the sound of their voices. "Davos, if you see anything suspicious, head for cover," said Rhaegar. "Sir Barristan and I can hide until it's safe for you to come back for us." They had both disguised themselves as fishermen, wearing rough spun that made their skin itch. In case things turned rough, they both had swords concealed beneath the folds of their tunics. Before setting off up the steps in the rock face, they exchanged an encouraging look. "Are you sure you can manage it, old man?" asked the prince. "Make it, with enough stamina left over to beat your arse into the dirt," came the dry reply. Rhaegar grinned into the darkness as he set off. Making this climb by day was one thing, but at night it was altogether different. They could barely see where they were placing their feet, and the ledge was perilously narrow, but make it they did, emerging at the base of the keep's curtain walls barely 10 minutes later, breathless and sweating. Carefully, they picked their way across the rocks, grateful that the weather had been dry and they weren't slippery. Still, they gripped each other's wrists as they navigated the rough terrain. When they reached the opening to the hidden entrance, Rhaegar sent up silent prayer of thanks to Seagard the Cruel. Had it not been for his madness, what they were about to do would have been impossible. "You served Robert," said Rhaegar. "It wasn't a question." Ser Barristan ducked low and made his way inside. "I was sworn to serve the king." "But Robert," Rhaegar repeated distastefully. "He wasn't the king, he was the usurper." Rhaegar, stop that. There was a note of admonition in Ser Barristan's tone. "Your sister's forgiven me. Even if you can't, I wouldn't have thought a little understand would be beyond you." Rhaegar sighed heavily enough for it to echo through the tunnel they had entered. If the place was guarded, it would have been enough to bring the Lannister pikemen out. But it remained deserted, and he and Barristan rattled along like two old ghosts. "Forgive me," he said, eventually. "It's just the thought of that man taking my place. Our place. Mine and Dainesy's, and Jon's. Speaking of which, you never did trust me enough to tell me Lyanna was pregnant," said Barristan. "I'm not faulting you, your grace." "I was going to tell you after the trident," he replied, quickly. He drew another deep breath, momentarily coming to a halt. "I should have told you right away. I'm sorry." A hand reached out and turned them around, so they were standing face to face. Even when their eyes had adjusted to the darkness, they still couldn't see much, but Rhaegar could still make out the outline of his old friend. However, he didn't need to see the disappointment in the other man's eyes. He could feel it emanating through the very air, clinging to the dust motes he inhaled with every breath. "Had I known you had a son," Sarah Barristan said. "Had I known my rightful king was hidden away in the north, passed off as Ned Stark's bastard get." "Ned Stark gave that boy something you or I could never have given him," Rosier cut in. "A happy and stable childhood in which he got to enjoy being a simple child. Even if things had gone right for us at the Trident, he wouldn't have had that. As it happens, it was Dane who needed you more." "Old Darry was looking after her," Barristan stated. "And even though Ned Stark wasn't a hand for long, he fought tooth and nail to keep that girl safe. I wondered why, at the time," he paused, laughing dryly. "Well, now I know. Gods, I knew Ned Stark had a bastard. I just never gave it a second's thought." "Lots of people have bastards," said Rhaegar. "You can't look at them all and think, hidden Targaryen." Sir Barristan laughed again. "No, I suppose not." Their journey through the secret passageway continued until they reached an iron-rung ladder built into the wall. They paused before it, craning their necks to look up and up. Unable to see 2 feet in front of their own noses, they certainly couldn't see where the ladder ended. It was a journey into the unknown in more ways than one. "Well, here I go," said Rhaegar, setting his foot on the bottom rung. "You stand guard here and wait for me. Unless you want to say hello to Cersei, too. It's been a while for you two, hasn't it?" Sir Barristan's reply was terse. "I'd sooner stick a tourney sword through my eye, and there's still time for you to come to your senses, too." "Oh no, I've been looking forward to this for too long now," replied Rhaegar, already climbing. "Wish me luck, old friend." After a climb that seemed to last forever, he emerged to a fissure in the wall he had to belly crawl his way through. Then another ladder and another belly crawl until he reached the chamber in Maegor's Holdfast that Cersei used for her chambers. He just assumed, correctly, that she was using the same queen's chambers his mother once used. Through the air vent grid of her ceiling, he could see her sleeping alone. An oil lamp nearby made her skin was pale as milk glass, like a cadaver in a pale ivory nitrail. Wasting no time, he removed the grid as quietly as possible and propped it against the wall of the crawl space. There was barely enough space for it to stand on end. After that, he eased himself headfirst out of the air vent, sort of curling himself out of it before landing softly on his feet. The sound of his hitting the ground, even smothered by a thick Marish rug, was still enough to cause her to stir in her sleep. To his relief, she did not awaken. He tiptoed over to her bed, drawing back the fine muslin drapes that shrouded her partially from view. This close up, he could see all her hair had been cut off, almost to the scalp. When he last saw her, her hair was a cascade of thick golden curls that fell to her hips. He wondered why she had cut it all off like a boy's, until he remembered the walk of shame that Sansa had mentioned. "Cersei," he whispered in her ear. To prevent her screaming at the sight of him, he pressed his hand to her mouth. Cersei, her eyelids fluttered, an indistinct noise emanated from the back of her throat as she slowly came to. "Wakey, wakey, your grace," he said, sing-song. "It's the ghosts of Dragonstone, risen from the dead. I thought you might like a catch-up after all these years." Finally, her eyes jerked open, emerald flashing in the darkness. She jerked upwards, her scream of terror stifled by the hand he continued to hold over her mouth. With his free hand, he pressed a finger to his lips. He said, "I mean you no harm." Her breathing was heavy and shallow, rapid as someone hyperventilating. In the light of the nearby oil lamp, her eyes shone with terror. He drew a deep breath just at the wrong moment. Her hand lashed out, smacking him around the face with such force he went reeling backwards into a nightstand, a vase falling off it and hitting him on the head. In which time, Cersei bolted for the door, screaming shrilly as she went. Realizing the Kingsguard would be moments away, he bolted for the nearest antechamber and hid inside it. Swiftly, he scrambled to the top of the shelves inside, wedging himself between the top of a cupboard and the ceiling. Once up there, he held his breath. Rhaegar Targaryen, I saw him, with my own eyes. Cersei was raging at her brother. He couldn't see them, only hear them. "Cersei, this is madness," Jaime replied. "Rhaegar is dead." "I saw him," she was insisting. "He was right there, by the bed. Look at my nightstand." "He knocked it over when I smacked him, Jaime. Can't you see?" Jasnake hesitated. "You were dreaming you knocked the stand over when you fell out of bed. Cersei, please, go back to bed. You haven't slept properly since Tommen died, and you need to rest." Rhaegar. Then, where is he? Jaime butted in over her. Fine, I'll search. He sounded angry. Had it been his sister who was terrified in the middle of the night, he'd show a little patience. He wondered what it was that had Jaime giving Cersei such short shrift. The room beyond the antechamber was being searched, then his door opened, and the beam of an oil lamp shone inside. All Jaime had to do was look up, shine his oil lamp, and he would see Rhaegar looking down at him from the top of the cupboard. But he was so annoyed with Cersei, he didn't look properly and vanished after barely a glance around. Nothing, Yaine's muffled voice said. At least Rhaegar Targaryen makes a change from Tyrion. But seriously, sister, this exhaustion is making you mad. You need to sleep. I am not mad, she hissed. But go, get out of my sight. Jaime left, but Rhaegar knew he would go no further than the door. The outer chamber, if he was really annoyed with his sister. In the meantime, the silence was broken by Cersei sobbing into her pillow. Rhaegar left it for a moment, giving her time to calm down and, if he was lucky, to absorb the shock of seeing him again. In the end, it was his own body that decided for him. Cramped on top of a cupboard, his legs grew stiff, and then pins and needles set in. Before he ended up frozen there forever, he eased himself down from his hiding place as quietly as possible. On the other side of the door, the sobbing ceased. Come out wherever you are, a soft voice said. I know you're in there. Rosier inched the door open. You're not going to hit me again, are you? Cersei gasped and leapt back from the door, clutching a loose robe around her chest. Begone, you night-tripping shade. I'm no ghost, he assured her, stepping away from the antechamber door. You can touch me if you want, although you already have. Strictly speaking, he was teasing her, leaning nonchalantly against the wall of her chamber. Meanwhile, she looked back at him, torn between horror and something else. Curiosity, he thought, but that wasn't it, either. She had brought a hand to her mouth, chewing on the tip of her index finger. The hardness, the fear had gone from her eyes, and they met his own. Emerald on indigo, unflinching now. What are you? She asked sotto voce. Cersei, you know, he replied. You said it to Jaime. He thinks me mad, she answered. She ceased chewing on her fingertip and brought her hand to his face, brushing against his cheek so softly, where moments before she had whacked him. You're warm. I can feel you. You are Rogue. I know you. I knew you. You died. Robert came back from the Trident, and I wept for weeks. Her voice was weak, tremulous. For the first time, he noticed she was shaking. Cersei, I am not going to hurt you, he said back. I only want to talk to you, privately. For a long moment, nothing happened. She stared at him in silence before stepping away abruptly. He feared she would call the guards again. Wait there, she bid him. Don't move. Don't hide. Stay right there. She whipped away in a swirl of silk, nitrail, and robes. Wrenching open the door of her bedchamber, she commanded the guards to leave her. Through the crack of the door, he caught sight of one of them. Not Jaime. This one was huge. Inhumanly huge. Gregor Clegane, he whispered beneath his breath. Somewhere at the back of his mind, Iaios screamed as Rhaenys was put to the sword. He saw his daughter skewered like a stuck pig to be roasted for the usurper's coronation banquet. His infant son's brains dashed against the wall. Wait. His inner voice urged, just wait. He felt the sword beneath his tunic, but knew he wouldn't get a chance to use it tonight. But Gregor could wait. His moment was yet to come. Cersei returned, locking the chamber door behind her. She also had a piece of old parchment in her hands, but he couldn't see what was written on it. We're alone now. But lay a finger on me, and I'll kill you all over again with my own bare hands. You're too kind, he answered. Cersei motioned for him to sit at a table near her bed, while she lit more candles from a taper in her hands. Before long, the room was bathed in warm light. Finally, she sat facing, although a little early in the day, she had a wineglass in her hands, full to the brim. He politely declined the offer of some himself. You are actually not the first person I know to come back from the dead. I should be getting used to it by now, she informed him, glancing toward the door. Regardless, she still looked pale and tasty. And as long as that fat, drunken sot Robert Baratheon stays dead, you'll not hear me complaining. You did not like Robert? He asked, genuinely curious. I couldn't have liked Robert any less if he was nothing more than a shit stain on my coronation robes, she answered. Is the dragon yours? Rhaegar nodded. aware that she was purposely changing the subject. I have one. My sister, Daenerys, has 3. Just so you know, we've taken back Dragonstone. He didn't mind admitting it to her, seeing as she hadn't the means to seize it back from them. She had 0 support. They had 4 adult dragons and a vast army. I heard about your sister's dragons, she said quietly. Thought they were fanciful stories. At first, then Jaime came back from the Riverlands talking about them, and dead men marching on the wall, saying, if we don't join our forces to those of Ned Stark's bastard, then we'll all die, and then he has the nerve to call me mad. He's not mad, Rhaegar replied. For now, he resolved to say nothing about Jon. She didn't need to know who he really was. The others are back and marching south, leading armies of the dead. They're not alive, they're just meat puppets, doing the others' bidding. And that wall won't stop them for long, Cersei. Ignore this threat, and soon we'll all just be meat puppets, doing the others' bidding. He couldn't tell if she was taking him seriously or not, but she was watching him over the top of her wine glass as she drank deeply and topped up again. Is that why you're back now, to fight these others? Rhaegar nodded. I think so. Maybe. Who knows? What I do know is, this is really happening. We all have to fight to save this realm. Even you. And that's why you're here now? She asked. Is that all? No, he answered. Truthfully, I wanted to see you. I was curious. That's all. They tell me you're mad. That there's no reasoning with you, but I remember you. We were children together. Your father would have had us more than just friends, and I suppose I could not believe you had changed that much. She paused, toying with the parchment she had brought with her. He could see now that there was nothing written on it. It was a drawing. Looked like a child's drawing. He remembered then that all her children had died. Was it any wonder she had lost her wits? Cersei, he said softly, I am truly sorry to hear about your children. I know all too well how that feels. Her brow creased. Have they not come back too? Rhaegar shook his head. Only me. My father never gave the orders, she said. Amory Lorch acted alone and we took his head for it, later. Much later, from what he had heard. But now was not the time to dwell on it. And Gregor Clegane, dead, she cut in. Oberyn Martell killed him in one-on-one combat. He frowned, recalling the man he saw outside her chambers. True, he didn't see the man's face, but he'd only ever met one man as large as that before. Rhaegar forced himself to reply, That's a relief. He paused for a moment, taking time to remember Jon's last letter, containing the new official line on their exact intentions. Whether they meant it or not was another matter. Look, we're not interested in taking the Iron Throne. Like I said, if we waste too much time down here, the wall will fall and we'll be overrun by these walking dead men. Join us, Cersei, and win yourself some respect by saving the whole realm. She drained her glass and topped it up again, thoughtful in the silence. For a long time, she didn't speak at all. She kept folding and refolding the faded old parchment in her hands, running her nails along the creases. After another moment, she laid it out flat and displayed a crudely drawn image of 2 people sitting on what looked like a winged horse. The horse had something pouring out of its mouth. I know why you're back, she said, knocking back half her glass. Oh, I've no doubt you're telling the truth about the North, queer sort of a place. I've been there once before, but I know why you're back. It all fits. Rhaegar changed his mind about the wine and helped himself to a hearty measure. He had a feeling he would be needing it. Do tell, your grace, he bid her. With a jolt to the heart, Jon remembered that this was where he awoke after being stabbed by the Night's Watch. In the foothills of the Mountains of the Moon, where the air was thin and cool and all around him lay narrow roads made treacherous by loose stones and rocky outcrops. Back then he had been naked and afraid, and so completely alone, he had no idea of where he was or when he was. Now he had an army at his back and a host drawn up of Knights of the Vale, escorting him and Sansa to Gulltown. As the journey progressed, he found himself searching for the exact spot he had awoken, but every track and every narrow path all looked the same. He recalled, with precision, the moment he first laid eyes on Lyanna and Brandon. He had feared they were brigands until he heard a girl's voice, and decided to chance his arm. As the journey progressed and he searched every bend in the road looking for the place he realized he was really searching for, as though some trace of her still lingered, an echo of his mother fading in the mountaintops. Looking back on his time with her now, he felt he only learned the truth at the last minute, when it was all too late and he had to come home. He could look back and pick out 100 little clues that he should have picked up on at the time, but it all only seemed to make sense when armed with the wonderful gift of hindsight. And since he returned, he had barely had a moment to remember her, to feel her loss and mourn her passing. Back in this place, where he met her first, it all returned in a cascade of memories. Sansa noted his silence, but didn't intrude upon it. Occasionally, it seemed she had guessed at what he was thinking, at what was going on in his head. At night, when the camp fell silent, she would reach out to him and squeeze his hand for comfort, a small act that kept him anchored to the right side of his own morbidity. "We'll be at Gulltown soon," she said one night. "On the morrow, perhaps." "If we're lucky," he had replied. But it wasn't until the day after next they were sailing out of Gulltown on towards Dragonstone. He watched from the rear of the ship, letting the mountains recede into sea mists, bearing him far away from the ghost of Lyanna Stark. But he couldn't turn away until they were gone completely, replaced only by the sea, iron gray and as flat and wrinkled as an old man's memories. "She's not there anymore." Sansa's voice drew him gently back into the presence. He had known she was there. She had never left his side. "But you are," he replied, turning to face her. "And you're all I need." They leaned into the kiss, a sea breeze whipping at their hair. That night she came to him in his bunk, dressed in an ivory silk nightrail, bearing a single guttering candle and steadying herself against the swaying ship. Her auburn hair braided, the plait falling almost to her hips. Jon pulled back the blankets covering him, getting up to help guide her inside. Sansa blew out the candle, plunging them into darkness before climbing in beside him. They lay together, their limbs entwined as the ship rolled gently on the tide. Slowly, their eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he found himself teasing the strings at the front of her nightrail, loosening the garment at her throat to expose the pale white skin of her bosom. He kissed her there and was met by a sharp intake of breath. Her face was turned toward the side of the bunk, her hands gripping the straw mattress hard enough to turn her knuckles white. Jon lay beside her again, wrapping his arms around her waist. Her body was as taut as a bowstring. He knew she had not been so intimate with a man since her sham of a marriage. "Or I'll never hurt you." "I know," she whispered back. All the same, she needed to fight her own ghosts now. The ghost of Ramsay Bolton, clawing at her thighs, ripping her insides as he forced her again and again. "But I'm still afraid," she added. "Not you. Never you. Just—" He could guess what it was, but he never had any intention of making her go that far. The fact that she had come to his bed had been enough, that she had trusted him even as far as that. "I'll never do anything you don't wish me to do," he assured her, caressing her neck. "I swear, tell me to stop, at any minute, and I will do so without hesitation." This time, she kissed him. She brought her hands to his face and pressed her lips against his own, letting it linger for a long time. All the while, he touched her as carefully as he could, fingertips brushing over bare breast and thigh. Every time she gasped or shivered, he stopped, fearful that he had gone too far. "Now," she whispered in his ear. Jon was reluctant. "Are you sure?" She said nothing, but nodded her head. She circled her arms around his waist, and together they exorcised the last demon that stood between them. They awoke the next morning, purged of the past and facing the future hand in hand together. Dragonstone loomed above them, the Dragonmont smoking away into the blue skies. Jon smiled, almost amused by the small figure with long silver-gold hair waving madly at them from the edge of the harbor. Rather shyly, he waved back, nudging Sansa to do the same. "That's not Rosiek," she said, returning the gesture. "Nope," he replied. "I think that's Aunt Daenerys." He looked to the skies again. As 4 adult dragons emerged from the mists of the Dragonmont, they're filled with their roars. He gripped Sansa's hand, watching them wheeling high above them, drawing a deep breath as he realized they were all teetering on the brink of something huge. Although Jon knew beforehand, he still managed to be surprised that his aunt was younger than himself, younger and shorter. She barely reached his shoulder and was as slender as a reed, with her silver blonde hair, lilac eyes, and skin as pale as milk glass. She looked half a child. It was another fact that had surprised him, given the life she had led, on the run from city to city, fleeing assassins and being married to a Dothraki horse lord, to hatching and raising dragons, from lethal poverty to conquering Queen of Meereen, and barely a wrinkle to show for it. She was equally curious about him, peppering him with questions as they walked along the beach. She wanted to know about his mother, his uncle, his castle in the north, and his time beyond the wall. All the while, she walked barefoot and splashed among the lapping waves as the tide crept slowly inwards. Her black-eyed, impeccably clean-shaven guards watched from a discreet distance as they walked and talked and learned all about each other. Unsullied, or so he thought as he caught sight of one stationed beside a sallyport. Meanwhile, overhead, the dragons wheeled through the air. Every so often, one of them dived down and snatched up a large fish that had ventured too close to the surface of the seas. Jon watched, transfixed as they tossed the still-living fish into the air, roasted it, and gobbled it down in one fluid movement. "Soniad is very beautiful, isn't he?" Daenerys said. "You can have a closer look at my three if you like." Without waiting for an answer, she called Drogon's name. Jon had no other words to describe the dragon other than a winged shadow. He landed heavily on the beach, sending up thick plumes of sand with the beating of his vast wings. Up close, Jon could see the scales shining black as onyx and shining like steel plate in the light of the afternoon sun. Heat radiated from the beast's giant body. Even his eyes were red and reminded Jon of smoldering coals. By his estimation, Drogon was as big as his two brothers combined. "Now that's a dragon," Jon remarked, approaching with extreme caution. Father's dragon was raised beneath Winterfell. Had he been out in the open, he might have been as large as this one. "My other two were confined," she admitted, sadly. But Drogon was too stubborn. Drogon regarded Jon with utmost indifference before swinging his vast head around to nuzzle his mother. Meanwhile, the other two landed close by while Soniar continued to stretch his wings above the clouds. Viserion curled up in the sand and closed his eyes. But Rhaegar was more curious. He came stomping through the sand to get a look at the newcomer in his life. Two large bronze eyes met Jon's, regarding him intently. "This one's up to something," he said. Rhaegar was nowhere near as intimidating as Drogon. His scales were moss green, with copper scales lining his belly, and the horns and wingtips were an orange red, like the fires he breathed. Carefully, Jon reached out and pressed the flat of his hand against the dragon's neck, letting the gentle heat warm him through. "He likes you," Daenerys remarked. "Go closer. He won't hurt you." Feeling a little more emboldened by his aunt's encouragement, Jon took the risk. Although Rhaegar was passive, he could still swallow him in one gulp. However, Jon showed no fear. He didn't even blink. After a full disconcerting minute, the dragon turned and flew away, vanishing quickly behind the clouds. Jon couldn't help but laugh. "Do you really think he liked me?" "You'd know if he didn't," she retorted. "Oh gods, Viserion actually is asleep." The smallest of the dragons, he still managed to blast sand at them every time he snored. A plume of it hit Jon in the face, making him choke while Daenerys laughed uproariously. "Not funny," he protested, rubbing his eyes. "Anyway, I suggest we go back. We've been gone for hours and Father ought to be back soon." Daenerys had told him earlier that Rhaegar had gone to King's Landing to speak with the Queen. Jon had not stopped worrying about him since. Although they kept their distance, Jon was still aware of the lank-eyed, unsullied following. It used to irritate him. How lords and ladies were followed by an entourage, like a flock of ducklings flapping around their mother. They returned to the Drumkeep, where the servants had laid out a light luncheon for them in the common hall, along with some wine Daenerys had brought from the free cities. It was there that their talk turned to business, a subject Jon was reminded of as Varys swept through the hall, exchanging a few quiet words with Dany as he passed. "Father hates him," he said, inwardly cringing against the eunuch's lingering perfume scent. "Blames him for driving the old king insane." "Why? It's well known that there's a streak of madness in our family," she pointed out. Jon shrugged, helping himself to some cheese and hard bread. Varys was constantly whispering in Rhaegar's ear, making him suspect everyone and encouraging the burnings. Rhaegar left court because of it, setting up a rival court here on Dragonstone. "With all that history, I really can't see them forgiving each other." "They don't have to forgive each other," she answered. "They just have to work together." "True enough," he conceded. "There will be more than one enemy fighting alongside each other in the coming wars." He may have united the three heads of the dragon, but uniting the realm would be altogether trickier. Over the coming months, he would have to find a way of uniting Lannister with Stark, Blackwood with Bracken, and a myriad of petty feudal rivalries harbored and nurtured down centuries of ceaseless power struggles. Free folk were one thing, but warring riverlords were quite another. For what it's worth, nephew, Theon Greyjoy thinks you're going to cut his head off before he can get a word in edgeways, she said. I must say, I'd appreciate it if you didn't. Jon sighed heavily. He saved Sansa's life. For that reason alone, I am sure I can resist temptation. But he's still a cunt. She laughed, almost choking on her wine. Before she could form her reply, however, the double doors opened and Rhaegar stood there, framed by the doorway. Although tired and disheveled, he beamed brightly at the sight of them both. Jon, he said, entering the common hall. Come here, I missed you, son, and you've met your aunt. Good, I'm glad. Welcome back, father. I'm relieved to see Lady Lannister hasn't served you up for a royal banquet. They met in a firm embrace, briefly just the two of them, before Rhaegar called Daenerys over too. She came up to join them, the three heads of the dragon with their arms linked around their shoulders. The three of them together, sending a shiver of anticipation down Jon's spine as he realized this was the first time they had all come together as one. The prophecy fulfilled, the dragons prowling nearby, the long night settling all around them. It felt like destiny. Despite being tired and hungry, Rizier joined them at the table for some food. Jon was burning with curiosity about the outcome of his father's talks with the Lannisters, but gave him time to eat first. He must have been aware of both Jon and Daenerys watching him, because he paused with a mouthful of oatcake and honey, glancing up nervously and gulping his food down. What? He asked. What do you mean? What? Jon replied. What in seven hells were you doing with Cersei Lannister? Oh, that, replied Rhaegar. You simply would not believe what she said to me. Well, don't leave us in suspense, said Dany, leaning forwards to get some more wine. She must realize she has no chance of clinging on to power now, not with the realm against her and an army consisting of 4 grown dragons. Thinking of the Unsullied and the Dothraki Dany had brought with her, Jon couldn't help but laugh. She has more than the realm against her now. She'll be faced with troops from the free cities as well as her own. Rizier took a moment to gather his thoughts. Well, that's just it. Cersei has her own theory about my miraculous return to the realms of the living. Jon had a feeling that, whatever it was, it would be interesting to say the least. Do tell, Daenerys prompted her brother. By Cersei's reckoning, I came back at around the same time she took the throne, Rizier explained. Clearly, her father has told the Seven Above about his grand plans for her and myself to marry when we were children, only for their divine plan to be thwarted by the madness of the apostate King Aerys. So, in their infinite wisdom, the Seven have interceded by bringing me back just as all her children died around her, so we could fucking marry and rule together as a legitimate royal dynasty. Here she even wrote out some terms under which she would graciously accept me as her co-ruling consort. Call it a second chance to carry out the will of the gods just as all seemed lost. Rizier reached into the pocket of the jerkin he wore, pulling out a roll of parchment and handed it to Jon. The royal seal was attached, but already broken, so Jon unrolled it and tilted it towards the light of a nearby candelabra. He found the queen's terms written in a hasty but legible hand. Meanwhile, Daenerys had been struck dumb by the Mad Queen's audacity. She's offering to join her forces to ours, though, he said. She's agreed to acknowledge Sansa as Lady of Winterfell and Warden of the North, including a royal pardon for her role in the murder of King Joffrey, first of his name. She's agreed to stand her forces down in the south, where they were set to sack Highgarden. She's agreed to send her army north to carry out an expedition north of the Wall. Jon broke off, looking up at his father. Father, she's giving us what we need. This is worth looking at. For a moment, Rhaegar looked stunned. Don't be ridiculous, Jon. Have you seen what she's asking for in return? Jon looked again at the document. The hand of Rhaegar, Prince of Dragonstone, in marriage. Tyrion Lannister brought before her in chains to await execution. A show of submission from all lords and lords paramount who rose against her in rebellion since the death of King Robert. All lords to swear fealty again, just as soon as the marriage ceremony takes place, so the new royal couple will be formally acknowledged by all in a timely manner. Foreign troops to be sent home and dragons to be confined to the dragon pit. After the cessation of hostilities in the north, he paused to draw breath. That submission will be seen as a humiliation by the northern lords. We cannot hand over Lord Tyrion, but we could still renegotiate terms, father. Both Daenerys and Rhaegar looked back at him, as if he had lost his wits. While Jon talked with Daenerys, Sansa had explored. Not since the awry had she seen such a castle. Its towers were built into the rock that formed the island itself, so that they looked like they'd grown organically from the ground. Parts of it were actually shaped like a dragon. She climbed the turrets and walked the arching bridges that were the stone dragon's tail. The air here was clean and brisk, carrying a sharp salt tang, and she could pause on said bridges to look out over the white-capped waves endlessly rolling over the shingle shores below. It was rare chance to forget the chaos all around her and look out over another horizon, to another place on another continent. Rosier-cheeked and bright-eyed, she returned to her and Jon's chambers at the top of the Windworm Tower. A steep climb up steps shining like obsidian, but it was only the all-pervading damp that seeped through the walls as if they were made of paper. Watching her step lest she take a tumble, she arrived at her chamber door only to find it ajar where she had left it locked. Apprehensive now, she stepped back and watched the aperture as if some unknown monster could come charging through it. And any moment, after taking a moment to gather herself, she pushed the door open fully. Nothing out of the ordinary could be seen. At first, the windows had been left open, and the net curtains billowed on the strong sea breeze. Her bed had been made and the fire was lit, but rendered ineffective by the open windows. It was there that she saw him, standing by an occasional table, topped with a vase of fresh flowers. He was barely taller than the table, his hunched back distorting the shadow he cast. But still she recognized him instantly. "My lord," she addressed her former husband, "I thought that you were dead, although it pleases me that you are not." Tyrion turned from the window to face her, meeting her gaze with his mismatched eyes. "Pleases you or surprises you?" "Both, if I am honest," she replied. "How do you do?" She closed the gap between them and closed the windows to retain some warmth from the fire. He looked much as she remembered him, but thinner now, more careworn, and he had lost some of the supreme confidence that spoke of his proud birth. It made his scar was more pronounced now. Somehow. "I'm on top of the world," he answered her. "I thought I was to be hand of the queen, only to find out my queen has no legitimate claim to the throne. I thought I would be bin back Casterly Rock, only to find my insane sister has a stronger grip on power than she ever did before. So, my lady, what am I to do?" Sansa pulled up 2 chairs while she weighed up what he had said. "I know you didn't kill Joffrey, although I wish that you had. Olenna Tyrell did it, with Petyr Baelish's connivance. Unless you knew of it too." He looked at her again, holding her gaze unblinkingly. "Do you have proof of that? Where is Baelish now?" Sansa couldn't help but feel a flicker of dismay. "Dead, I saw to it myself, but Lady Olenna has nothing to lose by admitting what she did. The poison was carried in my hairnet. Do you remember when she made a fuss of me straightening it out? While she was doing that, she pulled a poisoned amethyst from one of the joins." Tyrion didn't look hopeful, but he thanked her all the same. "So, did you miss me?" "Not really, no," she answered, honestly. "You were never one to deny a hard truth, so I hope you'll forgive me for being honest now." Tyrion chuckled, giving a shrug of his uneven shoulders. "Well, I walked into that one, didn't I? I must admit, I wanted to kill you. At first. You just ran off and left me to take all the fall for that obnoxious shit's murder. But it would have been worse had you stayed. You would have died in my place, and I would never have had the pleasure of hearing how you brought about the demise of that insidious worm, Petyr Baelish." Sansa smiled, suppressing a giggle as she realized he was asking her to tell all. So, she did. Starting with the day Joffrey was murdered, to her escape orchestrated by Baelish through hapless Sir Dontos. She paused only to pour them both some wine just as she reached the bit about being sold to the Boltons. Tyrion's wonky smile died, replaced by a grave concentration that turned the air around them chilly. "Afterwards, when we had taken back Winterfell," she said, "Lord Roose told me that Baelish told him I'd been kidnapped by the Boltons, not that he sold me to them, so I went along with it and had Lord Roose arrested for his part in this ridiculous, fake conspiracy. I told Baelish I was clearing the way for him to take the veil for himself, and that I agreed to marry him. He confessed everything to me before the heart tree, while the guests were listing in from the shadows. Lord Roose himself was there, he heard everything, but I let Rhaegar cut off Petyr's head. He was the one most affected by Baelish's interference." Recalling Baelish's downfall made her feel alive again. Even Tyrion looked impressed. "Someone once told me you were nothing more than a frightened little girl," Tyrion recalled. I told that person that you might just outlive us all. See, my lady, I am never wrong. He paused, a ponderous pause. Hatter Baelish, stricken on his own staff. How I wish I could have seen it. Sansa smiled, recalling their wedding day. It was a humiliating day for both of them, and she hadn't exactly helped. Something that at that moment brought with it a pang of regret. I'm sorry I didn't kneel for you, she said quietly. Tyrion shrugged again. You could have bent those stiff, stark knees, but it only would have been an act of pity. Anyway, enough of this wallowing in the past. I say we join the family reunion, hanging below. Sansa agreed readily, setting down her wine glass and holding her hand out to Tyrion. They escorted each other back down the stairwell, chatting more easily as they went. But they cut off into a silence as they met Daenerys on the stairs, coming up as they were headed downwards. She looked worried, and the color in her face betrayed her haste. A huge row has broken out, she said. Come quick and see if you can't talk some sense into these two. She grabbed Sansa's wrist and began running back down the stone steps, their footsteps echoing all the way down. Tyrion, on shorter legs and a worse back, struggled to keep up, but was soon left behind. Sansa wanted to wait for him, but every time she stalled, Daenerys hurried her along. And by the time they reached the drum keep, Sansa could understand the haste. She burst through the doors to find Jon and Rhaegar, engaged in a row so fierce their voices echoed all around the chamber. Facing each other from across the table, they were both red in the face, with anger. Only the table kept them apart, a convenient barrier to stop them actually physically laying into each other. Neither of them noticed her arrival, and even Ser Barristan and Ser Davos were keeping their distance now. You've been on at me to take this realm for months now, Jon stormed at his father. Yet I give you a command, and you flagrantly ignore it. Because you're not the king yet, Rhaegar cut in, and if I do this thing, I don't see how you can be king. Jon turned abruptly from his father, running a hand through his hair in agitation. Jon, what's happening? She asked, daring to enter the hall properly. What's all this shouting about? Jon met her gaze for a moment, his dark gray eyes glinting ominously. After he shoved a roll of parchment in her hands, he said, We have a perfectly decent offer of peace and reconciliation, but His Grace over there wants to turn it down for his own selfish reasons. My lady, I beg you, see reason and tell him this is too much. Rhaegar implored her. To heal this realm, I will take any number of consequences for my actions now and in the past. But not this. This is too much. Sansa wished they would both calm down so she could concentrate. It was a marriage proposal. She read the terms and conditions carefully, squinting to keep the small and untidy writing in focus. Cersei wanted to marry Rhaegar in return for a formal alliance. As soon as she looked up from the parchment, Jon rounded on her. Sansa, tell him Cersei is probably barren. She's about that age. It's not like she's going to give him children. As soon as she's dead, I will be king, and you my queen. It's almost ideal. This way we get to return north for a while before we inherit the crown. We can set our affairs in order. Jon, she said, holding up Cersei's terms. This is absurd. I will not subject my bannermen to the humiliation of a formal show of penance before Cersei. I will not force them all to swear fealty to her. I will not hand Lord Tyrion over to her. Jon held up his hands in a gesture of conciliation. I thought you of all people would understand. This is just the starting point of negotiations. Sansa, think about it. She needs us, Rhaegar, much more than we need her. We can get these terms changed and use our superior position to get much more by way of concessions. True, she agreed. Sansa, no, Rhaegar cut in before she could continue. This is not fair. Jon lost his temper. Again. A vein bulged at his temple as he closed in on his father. This realm has already bled for your selfish desires once before, he fumed. So, you will do this thing and call it your penance. You're punishing me for something I had no control over, Rhaegar argued back. You know not what you ask of me, and I beg you, anything but this. Recognitions dropped in Sansa's memory like a stone down a well. She had seen this moment. She saw this argument after the potion Maester Marwyn had given her. The feeling was so strong it knocked the breath from her lungs, and she had to lean against the table before she fell down. Valankar, the woman in her vision, had said. Just then, Tyrion finally caught up and came waddling into the hall. Meanwhile, Sansa struggled to remember the rest. Queen, you shall be until another, younger and more beautiful, comes to cast you down. Meanwhile, Jon and Rhaegar were still fighting, and Sansa had had enough. She could barely hear herself think, all the more frustrating because she felt like she was grasping at the smoke of a solution. "Stop it," she screamed, positioning herself between them. "Stop it, both of you." Finally, the two men stuttered into silence. Heavy sighs were heard from both sides. Rhaegar turned away to go and actually sulk in a corner. But Sansa was thinking. She was thinking fast as the germ of a plan formed in her head. She met Tyrion's gaze and smiled. He had not yet seen the proposal, so she handed over the parchment. "My lord," she said, "we have work to do." Cersei would have her wedding. Sansa was set on it. Jon drew a deep breath before knocking on his father's door. Hours had passed since their fight, darkness had fallen, and supper had already been taken in the common hall. But Rhaegar had been present at none of it. He had apologized to Daenerys, but Sansa and Tyrion had sat at the end of the table with their heads together for hours. He shuddered to think what plots they were cooking up between them. Meanwhile, Jon had grown regretful. It was his habit to avoid unnecessary wars, and if peace with the Lannisters meant no blood in exchange for an empty wedding, then he could have lived with that, but he had been a fool to rage at his father like that. As such, he knocked on his father's door and let himself in. The fire was lit. There were signs of recent life in the form of a dirty plate left on the arm of a chair. But his father wasn't to be seen. Eventually, Jon found him fast asleep in his bed. He paused, considering whether or not waking him was a good idea. But, as he turned to leave, Rhaegar stirred and moaned softly as he awoke. "Oh, seven hells, you've come to put me over your knee, haven't you?" Still half drugged with sleep, Rhaegar sat up in his bed. "Actually, I came to make peace," Jon replied. "I shouldn't have said what I said about you and my mother." "You meant it though, didn't you?" said Rhaegar. "You think I started the rebellion. You blame me for the war. Perhaps you're right, but I loved your mother more than I can say. And the same goes for you." Jon sat down on the edge of the bed, pulling the hangings out of the way. "I just don't want people to die needlessly. If we can make peace, then we should, because when winter comes, we're going to need every last man we can spare, and that's bad enough without us fighting and dying here as well." Rhaegar was quiet for a moment, dropping his gaze. "I saw Rhaegar Clegane. Jon, he's Kingsguard now. You know what he did and now he's Kingsguard, and you want me to marry the woman who made him Kingsguard." Jon was momentarily shamed into silence. "I honestly thought he was dead. They told me Oberyn Martell killed him. And Cersei made reference to me not being the first to come back," he explained. "What if it was him?" She called him Robert Strong, but I swear I took him for Clegane. "Then this is your way into the Red Keep to finish the bastard off for good," Jon said evenly. "I don't pretend to know what St. Cyr and Tyrion are talking about, but I think they're planning something. I know she's summoning her bannermen here, and the River Lords have been sent for. Somehow, I don't think Tyrion will be planning something that involves his own execution," Rhaegar said. "But I don't like it, Jon." "No one's asking you to like it," Jon replied. "Let's just see if we can't all come up with a plan, and we might just rid ourselves of Cersei for good." "Westerosi weddings are bad for the health these days," Rhaegar said. "But I want Clegane, Jon. He's mine to kill. For the sake of my brother and sister, and for Princess Arya, you will get him." "I promise," said Jon. "There's a way, and together we'll find it." Tiredness and endless traveling, combined with fear of the upcoming wars, were fraying everyone's tempers. Tiredness was something Rhaegar appeared to be remedying, so Jon was keen to leave him to it. They embraced, sealing their truce over the wedding. "Go back to sleep, father. I'll see you in the morning."